It started with the hum of the fluorescent lights, the kind of low buzz you don't really notice until the store gets quiet enough to make your skin crawl. That buzz filled the space in between the piped-in soft rock music and the occasional crackle from the PA system. The whole store had that sterile, overly bright atmosphere, like a hospital, except this one sold milk and frozen lasagna instead of hope and morphine. My name's Darren. Back in 2017, I worked overnight stock at a grocery store in a small town in northern Indiana. It was one of those chain stores trying to look like a local market, with hand-painted signs and rustic wood accents slapped on top of cookie-cutter aisles. Most people wouldn't even think twice about a place like it. But I still can't walk past a refrigerated section without thinking about what happened that year. I'd started working there after my hours got cut at the auto body shop. My girlfriend at the time, Cindy, was pregnant, and we needed the money. The night shift was a godsend in that way. Few customers, fewer managers, and you were mostly left alone to stack cans and restock freezers while listening to whatever you could sneak in through a hidden earbud. It was an easy enough job. Monotonous, sure, but peaceful, at least until around mid-September. That night, it was just me, Dale, the old-timer who'd been working there since the Reagan administration, and Jamie, a college kid who never spoke unless you spoke to her first. Dale worked produce, Jamie handled general dry goods, and I got the freezer aisle. Things started getting weird in little ways at first. Around 2:15 a.m., I was moving a pallet of frozen meals down aisle 9 when the lights flickered hard enough to make me pause. It wasn't just a dimming, more like a full, violent blink, like the building sighed and forgot how to breathe. The hum stopped for just a second, and when it came back, everything felt off-kilter. The air was too still. The music had stopped. Power surge, I told myself. I went to check the breaker room. As expected, everything looked normal, but when I came back, I found half the freezer doors on aisle 9 hanging open. Nothing else disturbed, just the doors. Now, there's no airflow strong enough in that aisle to swing those big industrial doors open, especially not all at once. I closed them one by one and chalked it up to maybe a mechanical hiccup. But when I turned around, I swear to God, one of them creaked back open by itself. I stood there staring at it, heart thudding in my chest, until Jamie walked by and startled me. "You okay?" she asked, looking at me sideways. "Yeah, just tired," I mumbled, trying to laugh it off. The next night, I made sure to prop each freezer door open just wide enough to see if anything would happen again. Nothing did for a while, but I kept feeling watched. Not just in the I'm alone in a big building way. This was different. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps behind me and whip around to find nothing. Other times, I'd catch what I thought was movement on the edge of my vision, just a blur. But every time I turned to look, it was gone. I asked Dale about it once. He gave me a long look, like he was weighing something in his head. "You ever seen the mirror?" he asked, lowering his voice. "What mirror?" "Back storage, near the old loading dock." I didn't know what he meant. That part of the store had been blocked off for years after they renovated. The new dock was on the south side, with better access to the freeway, but Dale insisted. "Go back there tonight. Just look." I shouldn't have listened, but I did. Around 3:30 a.m., when things were slow and Jamie was on break, I slipped through the old employee hallway behind the break room. At the end was a steel door with faded letters, "Receiving." I hadn't opened it before, mostly because it was always supposed to be locked. But that night, it wasn't. The hinges groaned as I pushed it open. A rush of cold air hit me, and it smelled wrong, like mildew, dust, and something sweetly rotten, the kind of smell that stuck in your nose. The room beyond was lit by a single flickering bulb overhead. Boxes were stacked high on broken pallets. At the far end, covered in cobwebs and grime, was a tall mirror leaning against the wall. Its frame was ornate, like something out of a mansion, completely out of place for a grocery store back room. I don't know what made me walk toward it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the same part of the brain that tells you to look over the edge of a cliff. But I did. And as I got closer, I realized I couldn't see my own reflection in it, not at first. It was like the glass was covered in smoke, or maybe it was showing a different room entirely. I leaned closer, and then in the center of the foggy surface, something moved. It was a person, or something shaped like a person. just a silhouette at first, but then it stepped forward and I saw its eyes, bright, glassy, and too wide. The rest of its face was stretched into a grin that didn't reach the eyes, like its skin had been pulled too tight. It tilted its head almost playfully, then raised one hand and tapped the inside of the glass. I fell backward, knocking into a stack of boxes. When I looked again, the mirror showed only my reflection. I didn't tell anyone. I told myself it was sleep deprivation, maybe a dream I'd walked through without knowing. But after that, things escalated. Jamie quit 2 days later. She showed up to her shift looking pale and shaky, walked into the office, and left without saying a word. Dale said he didn't blame her. He wouldn't say why. That night, I was stocking frozen pizzas when I heard a whisper. At first, it was just my name, Darren. Soft, almost playful. I spun around. No one was there. Then again, Darren. Closer. I backed away, heart racing, and turned the corner of the aisle. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the floor. Frost had spread across the tiles, like someone had spilled liquid nitrogen. But there wasn't any open freezer, no broken seal, just that icy trail leading down toward the old back hall. I followed it, stupidly. I still don't know why. The trail ended at the mirror. It had been moved. Now it stood upright in the center of the room, tilted slightly forward like it had been watching the door. My reflection was gone again. This time the figure stepped forward right away. It wasn't alone. There were others behind it, too many to count, crowding behind the glass. All smiling, all with those dead, glittering eyes. One of them pressed its hand to the glass and frost bloomed outward from the spot. I swear it started to crack. I ran. I don't remember how I got back to the break room or how I got through the rest of the shift, but I told the manager the next morning I was done. I didn't care about the paycheck. I just wanted out. 3 weeks later, I saw in the local paper that Dale had died. Heart attack, they said. Found him in the freezer aisle, the same aisle I used to work. They said he was reaching out toward the glass door of the case when he fell, like he was trying to get out or keep something in. The store's still open. They redid the whole back section, tore down the old dock, replaced everything with new shelves. No one talks about the mirror, but I think it's still back there, somewhere. Sometimes, in other grocery stores, I catch glimpses, reflections that don't match up, smiles that vanish when you stare too long. I haven't worked a night shift since, but the hum of those lights still brings it back. Every time. Story the end. Working overnight shifts at a grocery store is the kind of job that you usually don't expect much from. You're there for the paycheck, for the hours, and sometimes for the quiet, an escape from the chaos of daily life. That's how I felt when I started working at the local Big Mart in a small Midwestern town. It was a clean, relatively safe place during the day, with families and busy moms picking up their groceries, the usual friendly cashiers, and the regular humdrum of a community hub. At night, it was just the skeleton crew of stockers and a manager who floated in and out to check on things. Nothing too exciting. But after a couple months, something started to shift. I'm Aaron, and I worked the overnight stock shift from late summer into early fall of 2019. I was 25, recently laid off from a dead-end construction job, and trying to make ends meet. The overnight shift was easy money compared to what I was used to, mostly because there were no customers after about 10 p.m., and you could almost zone out while moving cases of frozen food and stacking shelves. The store closed at midnight, but we worked until 6 a.m., restocking and cleaning before the morning rush. The first few weeks were boring as hell. I learned the layout of the store, how to drive the electric pallet jack, and to avoid the weirdly cold parts near the dairy aisle. I worked alongside two other guys, Mike and Robbie, both in their late 20s, and we joked around to keep ourselves awake. The manager, a guy named Frank, was hands-off most nights. He'd swing by for a bit around 3 a.m., chat for a few minutes, then disappear again. It was around mid-September when things started getting weird. One night, just after 2 a.m., I was stacking cans of soup in aisle 6. Mike was working frozen foods at the other end of the store, and Robbie was in the back room handling deliveries. The fluorescent lights buzzed steadily overhead, but I noticed one of them flickering intermittently, a sharp, nervous blink, like the light was struggling to stay on. I stopped to look up at it, and for a brief moment, the whole store seemed to hold its breath. The buzzing sound dropped out, the air felt heavier, and even the soft pop music piped through the speakers stopped. I shook it off, thinking it was just a power surge. The store was old after all, and the wiring wasn't the best. About 5 minutes later, I heard a low thud coming from the back aisles near the cleaning supplies section. It was subtle, but definitely not normal. I called out to Mike, but no answer. I walked down the aisle to check it out, and as I passed the glass door refrigerator, I noticed the lights inside were dimmer than usual. One of the doors was slightly ajar. The door should have been sealed tight. These things usually beeped if left open too long. I closed it and listened closely. That's when I heard a soft scratching sound coming from behind the door. It was faint but persistent, like fingernails scraping against glass. I froze. My skin prickled. I called out again, "Mike? Robbie?" No response. I looked around and saw nothing. The aisles were empty. Shrugging it off as a prank or maybe a rodent caught behind the glass, I moved on. But inside, I felt like something was watching. Over the next few nights, the strange occurrences increased. Lights flickering at odd intervals, distant footsteps echoing through empty aisles, cold spots that wouldn't go away no matter where I stood. I mentioned it to Mike, but he just laughed. "You're seeing ghosts, man," he joked. One night around 3 a.m., Mike and I were stacking canned goods in the dry food aisle. Robbie had called in sick, so it was just the two of us. I was on the ladder, placing cans on the top shelf, when I felt a sudden chill brush past my neck. The temperature dropped noticeably, and I swear I heard whispering right behind me. "Did you hear that?" I asked, descending the ladder quickly. "What?" Mike said, looking around. "Something whispered, like right behind me." He shrugged and went back to stacking. "Probably the AC. This place is old." I wanted to believe that too, but my unease kept growing. Then came the incident that really scared me. It was a Friday night, and the store was nearly empty, except for a couple of stockers and the manager. Around 4 a.m., I was in the produce section, unloading a pallet of apples. I was alone. Mike had stepped out for a cigarette break, and Robbie was still off. I was bending over to pick up a box when I caught movement in the corner of my eye. I turned quickly and saw a woman standing near the end of the aisle. She looked pale, with long, dark hair hanging in front of her face, wearing a long, faded dress that looked like it belonged in another era. Her feet didn't touch the floor. I blinked, and she was gone. My heart hammered in my chest. I called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" No answer. I told Mike about it when he got back. He said I was probably just tired and imagining things, but I wasn't imagining it. The next night, I was at the checkout area helping restock some shelves when I noticed the security cameras flickering on and off. Frank, the manager, was watching the monitors in the office, frowning. "Looks like we're getting some interference again," he said. "Interference from what?" I asked. He shrugged. "Sometimes the older equipment acts up." I wasn't convinced. On my way to the break room, I passed by the dairy aisle again, the same spot where I'd first heard that scratching. The refrigerated doors suddenly slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the shelves. The lights above flickered wildly, and the temperature dropped so quickly I could see my breath. I ran out of there. Over the next week, I heard more whispers. Sometimes the voices weren't just whispers. They were cries, laughter, footsteps racing past me when no one else was there. My coworkers began to look uneasy too. Mike said he didn't want to work alone anymore. One night, after a particularly rough shift, I stayed late to finish restocking the frozen goods. The store was silent except for the buzz of the freezers. As I stacked boxes of frozen vegetables, I noticed a figure at the end of aisle 12. It was a man wearing a grocery store uniform. I called out, "Hey Mike, Robbie?" No answer. I started walking toward him, but the figure vanished like smoke. I was completely on edge by this point. I went to the manager, Frank, and told him I was thinking of quitting. He looked at me strangely and said, "You're not the first to say that." I pressed him for answers, and he finally admitted that the store had a dark history. Years ago, before the renovations, a worker died here, late at night. Nobody ever really talks about it. I asked him what happened. "A forklift accident in the loading dock. The guy was crushed. They say his spirit never left." I didn't know what to say. The story sent a chill down my spine. That night I decided I had to see the loading dock for myself. The back entrance was usually locked, but the door was cracked open just a bit. I slipped through. The dock was empty, save for the smell of oil and cold metal. But as I moved closer to the wall, I noticed something odd, a smudge of dirt shaped like a handprint, pressed high up on the concrete. I reached out to touch it, and suddenly the overhead light flickered off. The darkness pressed in. I ran back to the main store, heart pounding. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I handed in my resignation. A few weeks later, I heard from a former coworker that the store had closed down for a while due to electrical problems. I never went back. Sometimes, when I'm out shopping, I catch a strange chill or hear a faint whisper, and I wonder if some places just carry their darkness with them. Story the end. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I punched in for my night shift at the grocery store just outside of Pittsburgh. I'd been working the late shift for a few months now, mostly because it paid a little better, and the daytime shifts were usually packed with customers and managers breathing down your neck. But nights were quieter, almost too quiet, and sometimes that stillness would creep under your skin if you weren't careful. The store was a mid-sized supermarket, a typical neighborhood spot where people came for their weekly groceries, late-night snacks, or last-minute essentials. It had the usual layout: produce in the front, aisles lined with canned goods and snacks, a small deli and bakery near the back, and a pharmacy counter tucked off to the side. The security cameras were supposed to keep an eye on things, but on the night shift, it was mostly just me and the hum of refrigerators. That night, the clock had just struck 10 p.m. when I started my rounds. I was tasked with restocking some shelves and running inventory, so I grabbed a cart and started down aisle 5. I liked the routine. It gave my mind something to focus on, a way to keep the creeping fatigue at bay. But tonight, there was an odd stillness in the air, like the store was holding its breath. I was halfway through refilling the canned beans when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I froze, listening. The sound came again, a faint shuffle like someone dragging their feet across the linoleum floor. I spun around, but the aisle was empty. I chalked it up to my imagination, maybe the old floor settling or some loose packaging shifting on a shelf. But then I heard it again. This time it was closer. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from aisle 7. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Aisle 7 was near the frozen foods, and it was usually deserted this late. I flicked my flashlight toward the aisle and started walking cautiously in that direction. The beam of light illuminated nothing but empty shelves and the occasional ice-covered freezer door. No sign of anyone. I called out softly, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. I kept moving down the aisle, the flashlight's beam steady in my hand. That's when I saw it. A shopping cart, slowly rolling back and forth on its own, no one pushing it. My heart jumped. I stopped dead and stared. The cart moved like it was caught in a slight breeze, back and forth, making a soft scraping noise on the floor. I swallowed hard and flicked the flashlight off, then on again, trying to clear my vision. When the light came back on, the cart was motionless. No one around. I took a deep breath, reached out, and gripped the cart handle. It felt cold, colder than it should have been. I pushed the cart aside and hurried to the nearest security camera monitor in the break room. The cameras were grainy, but I watched the feed from aisle 7. The cart was there, sitting still, and then without warning, it started moving a little, as if pushed by an invisible hand. I blinked. The footage distorted briefly, then cut to static. I sat back, rubbing my temples. Probably a glitch, I thought. The store's old wiring had been a problem for years. I tried to shake off the unease and got back to work. About an hour later, I was at the checkout when the intercom crackled to life. The voice was garbled, almost like it was coming from underwater, but I clearly heard, "Help. Help me." I jumped, dropping a candy bar I was scanning. I looked around. The store was empty except for me. I pressed the intercom button and called the front desk. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence. I checked the cameras again. No customers, no employees, nothing out of the ordinary. The voice sounded so real, so desperate, I felt my skin crawl. Then the lights flickered and dimmed, dropping the store into near darkness, save for the emergency exit signs glowing in red. I hurried to the main electrical panel, but the breakers were all on. No reason for the power to cut out. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, but the screen was blank. No signal. The silence was broken by a slow, deliberate tapping sound. It was coming from the dairy aisle. I crept toward the sound, heart pounding, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. I rounded the corner to see the milk cartons rattling on the shelf as if something was behind them, breathing heavily. Then a shadow darted across the aisle, and my flashlight flickered. I froze, breath caught in my throat. "Who's there?" I called out, voice trembling. No answer. Suddenly, the overhead speakers burst to life with a piercing screech that made me cover my ears. The lights flickered again, then all went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, heart racing. When I finally clicked it on, I caught a glimpse of a figure standing just at the edge of the light. Tall, with dark clothes, face obscured. I stumbled backward, tripping over a box and falling hard on the floor. The figure stepped forward, and I caught sight of its face, pale, expressionless, eyes dark and empty. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward the exit, but the front doors wouldn't budge. I rattled the handle, panic rising. Then the lights flickered back on. The figure was gone. I ran to the break room and locked the door behind me, heart hammering. I tried calling the police, but still no signal. The tapping started again, this time on the other side of the door. I backed into a corner, breathing heavily. Suddenly, the store's old radio, left on a nearby counter, crackled to life, playing a low, static-filled voice repeating, "Help me, help me." The tapping stopped, then silence. Hours later, the morning shift arrived to find the doors locked and me sitting on the floor, eyes wide and wild. No one believed my story, chalking it up to sleep deprivation or stress, but I knew what I saw, what I heard. The grocery store was not empty that night. Something was there with me. Waiting. Watching. Story the end. The night I first noticed something wrong at the grocery store, I was just doing my job. I had picked up the night shift at Greenway Market because I needed the extra cash, and it was supposed to be a quiet, easy gig. The store was an older building on the edge of town, one of those places where the smell of stale bread and spilled milk clung to the air like a second skin. They hired me right out of high school, so I was barely 18, new to the workforce, and figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. That first night, everything felt normal. I was stocking shelves in the canned goods aisle, restocking soups and beans, when I heard a loud crash from the frozen foods section. I paused, thinking maybe someone had knocked something over. The store was supposed to close at 11, and it was close to that now, about 10:45. Usually by that time, the aisles were empty, except for a few last-minute shoppers. I dropped the can in my hand and headed toward the noise. The frozen food aisle was long and narrow, lined with freezers on either side filled with pizzas, vegetables, and ice cream. As I got closer, the aisle was empty, no spilled boxes or broken glass. Nothing out of place except a single frozen lasagna lying face down on the floor. No footprints, no signs of anyone having been there. I bent down to pick it up, but that's when I heard it. A low whisper, almost too quiet to hear, coming from the back of the store near the loading docks. It was barely a breath, a soft hiss, but it sounded like my name. Danny. I stood up quickly, heart pounding. I knew no one was supposed to be back there. I was the only one on the floor, and the other employees had already gone home. I told myself it was my imagination, nerves from being alone in the store at night. I grabbed the lasagna and headed back toward the checkout lanes, where the registers sat empty and the lights were dimmed for the night. The fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead, casting long shadows that danced in the corners. The store was supposed to feel safe, just a place to get groceries, but that night it was anything but. Over the next few weeks, the strange things escalated. I kept hearing whispers, soft voices calling my name from the aisles. Sometimes I'd see movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows slipping between shelves. When I turned to look, nothing was there. One night, I found the shopping carts all lined up in the middle of the produce section, though no one had pushed them there. The night before, they'd been stacked neatly near the entrance. I asked the morning crew if they'd seen anything weird, but they just laughed it off, telling me I was imagining things. There was one employee, Marissa, who worked the evening shift and said she'd seen a figure in the back room. A man wearing an old-fashioned suit, standing still and watching her from the shadows. She said it looked like something from another time. I thought she was joking, but her face was pale when she told me. The store itself had a history. Built in the late 1950s, it had been through a few owners and several renovations, but the bones of the building remained old and creaky. I found an old newspaper clipping pinned to the bulletin board near the break room. It told the story of a man who died in the store back in 1963. He was an employee who worked the night shift, found in the freezer after a heart attack. Sometimes I wondered if that was the figure Marissa had seen. One night, I stayed late after closing to finish cleaning the deli case. As I worked, the lights flickered and went out for a few seconds, plunging the store into darkness. I could hear my own breathing, loud in the silence. Then, the emergency lights kicked on, dim and orange. I heard the intercom click on and a voice crackled through. It wasn't the usual announcements, but a faint whisper repeating over and over, "Leave, leave, leave." I dropped the cloth I was holding and ran to the front doors. They were locked tight. The alarms hadn't gone off, but I felt trapped. My phone had no signal inside the building. I called out for anyone, Kurt, the manager, but no response. For the next hour, I stayed near the registers, eyes darting to every dark corner, every shadow. When the morning shift arrived, I bolted outside and didn't look back. Eventually, I quit. But I still think about those nights, about the store that didn't just sell groceries but seemed to hold on to something dark and restless. Story the end. The fluorescent lights in the grocery store flickered intermittently, casting long shadows down the aisles as night settled outside. I was the lone cashier on the graveyard shift. My name's Jason. I'd worked at Miller's Market for almost a year now, a small family-run store on the outskirts of a Midwestern town in Illinois. Most days were quiet, uneventful, with the occasional late-night shopper wandering in. But this night was different. This night felt like something out of a nightmare. It all started around 11:15 p.m., a little over an hour before closing. The store was nearly empty, save for a few stragglers picking up last-minute essentials. I was finishing restocking the gum and candy near my register when the overhead speaker crackled to life. Normally, it was the store manager's voice giving instructions or calling for a cleanup. But this time, the speaker emitted only a faint static noise, followed by a barely audible whisper. I paused, glancing at the speaker mounted in the corner of the ceiling. The noise stopped, and for a moment, everything was still again. Then, faint footsteps echoed from the far end of the store, in aisle 12, the canned goods aisle. It was late, and the aisles were usually deserted after 10 p.m., so the sound was unexpected. I looked up from the register, expecting to see a customer, but no one was there. A chill ran down my spine. I told myself it was just one of the janitorial staff cleaning up early, or a customer who'd wandered off. About 10 minutes later, a man approached my register. He looked ordinary at first glance. Middle-aged, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, a faded jacket, and jeans. His hands were tucked into his pockets, and he barely made eye contact. "Just some water," he muttered quietly, placing a single bottle on the counter. I rang it up, noting his odd silence. Most customers chatted a little, even just to be polite. "Cash or card?" I asked. He mumbled, "Cash," and dug into his pocket slowly. His hand trembled slightly, revealing pale skin underneath the jacket sleeve. I slid the bottle toward him as he handed me a couple of crumpled bills. His fingers brushed mine, icy cold despite the warm summer night outside. "Have a good night," I said, trying to keep my tone light. He looked up suddenly. His eyes were the kind that don't reflect light well, dull and shadowed, and then, without a word, he turned and walked away toward aisle 12. I watched him disappear into the shadows of the canned goods aisle. The store was quiet again, but a knot had formed in my stomach. I went back to the register, still unsettled. Then the lights flickered. Just for a second, but enough to make me flinch. The store speaker crackled again, this time louder static, then a voice, distorted and whispery, but unmistakably a voice. "Jason," I froze. "Jason, you shouldn't be here." The speaker hissed and buzzed, then cut off entirely. I spun around, looking for anyone who might be messing with the system. There was no one near the service desk, no employee in sight except me. My heart hammered as I grabbed the store's radio on the counter and called Maria, the manager on shift. "Maria, you there?" I whispered into the mic. No response. I tried again. Still nothing. I called Adam, the owner's son, who sometimes stayed late to do paperwork in the office. "Jason?" I'm here. What's up? He answered finally, his voice a little groggy. I don't know, man. The speakers just whispered my name, and then this voice said I shouldn't be here. It's freaking me out. There was a long pause. Maybe it's some kind of interference? Maybe a radio frequency got mixed up with the PA system? I wanted to believe him, but the feeling in my gut said otherwise. I'm locking down the store early tonight, I told him. Something's not right. Adam told me to call him if anything else happened. I walked slowly to aisle 12, flashlight in hand, heart racing. The store felt colder, even though the air conditioning was off. The aisle was empty, but the shelves seemed off. Some cans were knocked over, and a trail of small dark smudges, like muddy footprints, led down the aisle and then disappeared. I followed the trail to aisle 13, the baking supplies. There, on the floor, lay a single dirt-caked shoe. It was small, like a woman's, but I had no idea how it got there. I picked it up and called Maria again. Maria, there's a shoe on the floor. Someone's definitely been here after hours. She told me she'd come in to check. While I waited, I stayed by the front counter, eyes darting to every dark corner. Minutes passed like hours. Suddenly, the power cut. The entire store went black. Emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie red glows on the ceiling and walls. I cursed under my breath and reached for my phone to call Adam, but there was no signal. Then I heard it. From the far end of the store, the sound of heavy breathing. I spun toward aisle 12. The breathing grew louder, ragged, uneven. A shadow moved just beyond the end of the aisle. Hello? I called out, voice cracking. No reply. The breathing stopped abruptly. I took a step forward, but a sharp clatter echoed from the opposite end, something falling over. I hurried toward the sound, trying to keep my flashlight steady. There, a stack of cereal boxes lay scattered on the floor. No sign of anyone nearby. Suddenly, I heard a whisper again. Jason. Closer this time, behind me. I whipped around, but saw only empty aisles. Then a cold gust brushed past my ear. I ran toward the front doors, trying the handle. Locked. My phone still had no signal. The panic was setting in. I went to the employee door in the back to see if I could get out that way. It was stuck. As I struggled with it, the store speaker crackled to life again. Jason, you can't leave. The voice was clearer now, cold and cruel. I slammed my hand against the door, but it wouldn't budge. From somewhere in the store, I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate. I grabbed a broom and held it like a weapon, moving toward the noise. The footsteps stopped, then silence. I called out again, "Who's there?" No answer. Then, just as suddenly as the power cut, the lights flickered back on. The emergency lights went dark. The main lights hummed, bright and harsh, and in the center aisle, standing perfectly still, was the man from before. His hoodie was up, but now I could see his face. Pale, expressionless, eyes that looked like deep, black holes. I raised the broom. "Get out of here," I shouted. He didn't move. Then he smiled, a slow, terrible smile that didn't reach his eyes. I swung the broom, but it passed through him as if he was a ghost. I stumbled back, breathless. He took a step forward. The air turned icy cold. I turned and ran toward the office, slamming the door and locking it behind me. I called 911. The operator answered immediately. I told them everything, trying to keep calm. They said officers were on their way. I heard sirens in the distance. But before the cops arrived, the speaker crackled one last time. "You're never leaving." The line went dead. When the police arrived, they swept the store, searching every corner. There was no sign of the man. No footprints except my own. No forced entry. The shoe was gone. The smudges disappeared, and the speakers, the strange voices, the chilling whispers, nothing was recorded. Maria told me to take the rest of the week off, but I couldn't. I kept working because something about that store was watching, waiting, and I'm still there every night wondering when it'll come for me again. Story the end. Melissa's shift ended around 10 p.m. on a Friday night. She worked as a cashier at a regional grocery chain called Fresh Mart, located on the edge of a small town in Ohio. Like most nights, she was tired but ready to clock out and head home. But before she left, she wanted to grab a few groceries for the weekend. Some milk, bread, maybe a frozen dinner. The store was already mostly empty. The fluorescent overhead lights hummed softly, and the aisles were quiet except for the occasional rustle of a stocking employee in the back room. The store's automatic doors slid open as she stepped outside, a little spring rain misting the parking lot. She hesitated, then decided to go back in. She'd forgotten her wallet in the break room. She unlocked the door again and went back inside. The store was even quieter now. The automatic lights in the produce section flickered on as she approached. The faint scent of bananas and oranges hung in the air. A few shopping carts stood idle near the entrance. Melissa grabbed a cart and began moving toward the refrigerated section, thinking she'd be in and out in 5 minutes. But as she passed aisle 3, something caught her eye. A man standing near the cereal boxes, completely still, staring straight ahead. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, and wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. The lighting was dim in that aisle, casting shadows that obscured his features. Melissa paused and glanced around, but no other shoppers were nearby. "Can I help you find something?" she called softly. The man didn't respond. He just continued to stare, motionless. A chill ran down her spine. She pushed her cart forward, trying to keep her distance. As she rounded the corner, the man suddenly disappeared. Melissa blinked, but there was no sign of him anywhere. Maybe she'd imagined it. Shaking off the unease, she continued to the dairy aisle. As she reached for a carton of milk, she heard a faint tapping noise, like nails clicking against a glass surface. She turned to see where it came from, but saw only empty shelves. Her heart beat faster. A sudden power flicker caused the lights to dim for a second, then brighten again. The overhead music, a soft pop playlist, cut out abruptly. The store felt cold and silent. Melissa grabbed the milk quickly and made her way to the checkout lanes. There, she saw Carla, a fellow cashier, finishing her shift. "Hey, Carla," Melissa said quietly. "Did you see that guy in aisle 3? Carla shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, but I heard about someone hanging around the store after hours lately. A few people have been creeped out." Melissa nodded, feeling less alone. They finished up, and Melissa stepped outside into the night air. The rain had stopped, but the parking lot glistened under the dim lights. As she walked to her car, she glanced over her shoulder. The man was standing by a light pole across the lot, his face still hidden. Melissa's pace quickened. She unlocked her car door and climbed in, locking it immediately. As she started the engine, she looked back, but the man was gone. Driving away, Melissa felt a lingering unease. The next morning, she searched online for any news about the store. She found a few forum posts from locals mentioning strange occurrences at Fresh Mart, flickering lights, odd noises, and sightings of a shadowy figure. One post talked about a man who had gone missing from the store parking lot a few months back. Melissa's stomach churned. That night, curiosity overcame caution. She returned to the store just before closing time. Inside, she felt the familiar chill. The aisles seemed longer, darker. She heard the tapping again, faint, rhythmic. Melissa followed the sound to the back storage area. Suddenly, a heavy door slammed shut behind her. The lights flickered wildly, then went out. Her phone's flashlight barely pierced the darkness. Whispers echoed around her, unintelligible but urgent. A figure appeared, barely visible, standing just beyond the beam of light. Melissa backed away, heart racing. The figure reached out a hand, and the flashlight died. She stumbled blindly, searching for an exit. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Finally, her hand found the door handle. She burst outside, gasping for air. The parking lot was empty. A car engine started nearby. Melissa looked up to see the man from before driving away slowly. She never returned to Fresh Mart. Weeks later, the store closed without explanation. Locals said it was haunted. Melissa moved away, but the memories never left. Every grocery store she entered afterward felt different. She knew some places held shadows no light could chase away. Story the end. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I clocked in for my usual night shift at the local grocery store, somewhere in the Midwest. It was a routine I had fallen into comfortably, stocking shelves, manning the register, cleaning aisles, and occasionally dealing with the few stragglers who wandered in late. I was used to the quiet, the hum of refrigeration units, and the faint smell of bleach mixed with produce. That night the store was unusually empty. It was a Monday in late October, just a few days before Halloween, and I'd heard from coworkers that business tended to slow down then. I checked the schedule and noticed my coworker Jenna had called out sick, so I was on my own until closing. The manager had assured me that everything would be fine and to just call if I needed help. Around 10:15 p.m., I was in aisle 6, restocking canned goods when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure, barely visible, seemed to flicker past the end of the aisle. I stopped and looked down the corridor, but no one was there. Probably just a shadow or a reflection from the fluorescent lights. I shrugged it off. I shrugged it off and continued my work. As I moved on to aisle 7, which held mostly frozen foods, I felt the temper drop noticeably. The cold from the freezers was normal, but this felt different, almost like a chill that seeped into my bones. That's when I heard it. A soft whisper, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. "Help me." I froze, scanning the aisles. No customers, no employees, just the empty, sterile store. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the silence. Nothing. I pulled out my phone to check the time, 10:17 p.m. The battery was low and the screen flickered erratically for a second, then stabilized. I decided to head toward the front to check on things, but as I turned, the flickering lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed the store. My heart jumped. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, turning it on with trembling fingers. The beam cut through the blackness, landing on the shelves, the floor, the checkout aisles. The emergency lights kicked in after a few seconds, but their weak glow made everything look more ominous, casting long shadows. I tried calling the manager, but got no answer. Suddenly, from the back of the store, I heard a loud crash like a metal shelf tipping over. I rushed toward the noise, keeping the flashlight steady. When I reached aisle 12, I found a shelf toppled over, cans scattered everywhere. Oddly, no one was around. I started to gather the cans, but then noticed something strange. Among the cans was a single empty box, one I had never seen before. It was plain brown cardboard, but had strange symbols scrawled in black marker, symbols that looked almost like a child's messy drawing of eyes and hands. I picked it up, and a cold wave passed through me. Behind me, a whisper again, "Don't look." I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. No one. But the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I backed away, knocking over more cans in the process. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Get out." I didn't reply. I ran toward the front of the store, but the automatic doors didn't open. I tried pushing harder. Nothing. Behind me, the whisper came again, louder this time, urgent. "Leave now." I panicked, sprinting through the aisles toward the emergency exit at the back. It was locked, but the panic gave me strength to pry it open. I burst out into the parking lot, the cold night air sharp against my face. I looked back at the store. Through the windows, the flickering emergency lights revealed the aisles, but nothing else. I called 911, and when the police arrived, they found no one inside. No explanation for the shelf falling over, no trace of anyone else. I quit the job the next day. To this day, I don't know what I experienced that night. If it was a prank, some electrical malfunction, or something else entirely. But sometimes when I'm near a grocery store late at night, I swear I hear whispers asking for help. Story the end. It started like any other Tuesday night. I was working the overnight shift at the neighborhood grocery store, one of those 24-hour chains that people rely on when life hits a snag and the usual stores are closed. The parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived around 10:30 p.m., and the cold autumn air hit me as I stepped out of my car. The sky was overcast, the kind that promised rain but never quite delivered. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting their sterile glow across the linoleum floors and neatly stocked shelves. The store was quiet, save for the occasional beep from the checkout scanners and the hum of the refrigeration units. I clocked in and grabbed my name tag from the hook behind the register. Tonight, I was assigned to stocking and customer service in the aisles, but I was expecting a slow night. The manager, a middle-aged woman named Karen, was already in the office area when I passed by. She gave me a tired smile, the kind that seemed to say, "Let's just get through this." She'd been working here longer than anyone and knew all the quirks of the store and its neighborhood. At first, everything was normal. I pushed my cart through the produce aisle, restocking bags of apples and bunches of bananas. The scent of fresh fruit, mixed with the faint smell of bleach from the cleaning crew who had finished earlier that evening. A few customers wandered in. Late-night snackers, people picking up last-minute essentials, a couple of night shift workers grabbing coffee. Around midnight, the crowd thinned out and the store grew quieter. I was organizing the canned soup section when I noticed the automatic doors slide open near the front entrance. I glanced up, expecting maybe a customer or delivery driver, but no one came in. The doors closed behind a rush of cold air. Shrugging it off, I continued working. The store was nearly empty now, except for a couple of lingering customers and a few employees restocking in the back aisles. The overhead music, a soft playlist of mellow pop tunes, played faintly through the speakers. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. Just a quick dip and return to normal brightness, but it caught my attention. The humming fluorescent bulbs seemed louder for a moment, and I could swear I heard a faint tapping sound coming from the other side of the store. I paused and listened. Tapping, like fingernails rapping against a glass pane. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a maintenance crew checking something or a random sound from the building settling. But the sound repeated. Tapping. Tap, tap, tap. I moved cautiously toward the source, which seemed to be near aisle 14, where the frozen foods were stocked. The large glass doors of the freezer glistened under the lights, and my breath fogged slightly in the chilled air as I stepped closer. No one was there. I scanned the aisles nearby. Nothing unusual. The freezer was full of frozen vegetables and pizzas, all neatly organized. I shook my head and turned back to the aisle, but the tapping sound resumed, this time coming from the front of the store near the checkout registers. My heartbeat sped up a little. The store was almost empty now. Why would someone be tapping on the glass there? I walked briskly to the front, the wheels of my restocking cart squeaking faintly on the tile floor. At the checkout area, the registers were dark and empty. The cashier's desks were clear, and the computer monitors were off. The store's automatic doors were closed. I looked through the glass. The parking lot was deserted. No cars, no people, just the dim glow of the street lamps. As I stood there, the tapping started again, but this time it wasn't from the outside. It was coming from inside the store, from the glass wall of the employee break room. I frowned and moved toward the door. The break room was small and plain. A table with a few chairs, a vending machine, a microwave, and lockers. The glass partition separating it from the rest of the store was clear and spotless. I tapped gently on it. No reply. Then suddenly a hand pressed flat against the glass from the other side. I jumped back, startled. The hand was pale, slender, with fingers spread wide, but the break room was supposed to be empty. No employees were scheduled for breaks at this time. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. The hand vanished. I felt a chill creep down my spine. Trying to shake the feeling of unease, I went back to the aisles to finish my restocking. I told myself it was probably a prank by one of the new employees or a trick of the light. But as the night went on, strange things kept happening. The music would cut out suddenly, replaced by a low static hiss. Shelves I had just organized were knocked over, cans scattered in neat piles. The overhead lights flickered again, and the temperature dropped noticeably. At one point, I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, but when I turned, no one was there. The worst moment was when I checked the security cameras on the manager's monitor in the office. The monitors showed the empty aisles, the front entrance, and the parking lot. But on one screen, I saw a figure standing in aisle 12. Tall, thin, wearing dark clothes, but the face was obscured. I blinked, and the figure was gone. Heart pounding, I called the manager's office extension. No answer. I left a message. Then the store's emergency alarms suddenly blared, shrieking through the building. Lights flashed red. I dropped my cart and ran toward the front entrance. The automatic doors wouldn't open. I pounded on the glass, shouting for help. No one answered. I fumbled with my phone, no signal. The alarms continued screaming. Then, as suddenly as it started, the alarms stopped. The lights returned to normal. The store was silent once again. I looked around, but the aisles were empty, the registers unmanned. I bolted for the back exit, using my keys to unlock it. Outside, the night was still and quiet. The street was empty, no signs of other cars or people. I jumped in my car and drove home, heart racing. The next day, I called the store to ask about the night's events. The manager sounded confused. There were no alarms, she said. No reports of any disturbances. But I knew what I saw. That night at the grocery store wasn't normal. Something was wrong, something not human. And I never worked a night shift there again. Story, the end. The old fluorescent lights flickered as I stepped into the grocery store that Friday evening. It was past 9, and the parking lot was nearly empty except for a few cars tucked far in the corners. I had stopped by to pick up a few essentials, some milk, bread, maybe a frozen meal or two. The store was familiar, one of those chain supermarkets that seem to exist in every town, filled with the hum of refrigeration units and the faint scent of bleach mixed with fresh produce. I grabbed a cart and wandered in, expecting a quick run through the aisles and then a checkout. What I didn't expect was the feeling I got as soon as I crossed the threshold, a quiet unease that settled deep into my chest. The store felt too silent. There was no music playing over the speakers, which was odd since it was usually on all day, something low and easy like soft rock or jazz. Tonight, nothing but an oppressive stillness. The overhead lights buzzed unevenly, casting flickering shadows along the rows of shelves. As I pushed my cart toward the dairy section, I noticed something strange. There were no employees stocking shelves, no other shoppers besides one figure down the aisle near the canned goods. The figure was hunched over, a man wearing a dark hoodie, his head bent low as he studied the labels. I nodded at him, but he didn't respond, didn't even glance up. I found the milk I wanted and moved on to the bread aisle. As I reached for a loaf, I heard the faint sound of a cart rolling behind me. I turned quickly, but no one was there. The sound stopped. Must be a rat, I muttered to myself. Rats weren't unusual in big stores late at night, though I'd never seen one here. Still, the place had an unsettling feel, and that little noise made my skin crawl. I decided to hurry through the rest of my shopping list. Next was frozen foods. As I rounded the corner, the man in the hoodie was gone. I scanned the aisle, but there was no sign of him anywhere. The silence pressed in on me. I opened the freezer door to grab a frozen dinner, but as I reached in, the glass suddenly fogged up from the inside, as if someone had just breathed on it. My hand jerked back, and I shivered. That was impossible. These freezers are sealed and tightly cooled. Trying to shake the feeling, I moved on to grab some paper towels and canned soup. At the end of the aisle near the checkout lanes, I saw a woman standing near a register. She wore a bright red jacket, and her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail. She seemed to be staring at the floor, rocking slightly on her feet. I approached, asking if she needed help. She didn't respond. "Hey," I said again, a little louder. "Are you okay?" She finally looked up, but her eyes were vacant, unfocused, like she was somewhere else entirely. I took a step back. Her mouth opened slightly, as if to speak, but no sound came out. She blinked once, twice, then suddenly turned and walked briskly toward the back of the store. I was creeped out, but figured maybe she was an employee having a rough night. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course, that made sense for the basement of a big concrete building. I hurried toward the registers to check out, hoping to be out of the store quickly. But as I approached, the woman was standing at the end of the checkout row, staring at me again, silent and still. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I moved faster. The automatic doors slid open as I approached the exit. But then they slammed shut in front of me, almost like a trap. I reached out and pressed the button to open them again. Nothing. I tugged at the handles. Locked. I spun around, heart pounding, and saw the woman had disappeared. Now the store was completely empty. No other shoppers, no employees. Even the overhead lights dimmed to an almost flickering twilight. I looked at my cart, still full of groceries, but suddenly the food seemed less inviting, almost grotesque. Then the paging system crackled to life. "Attention customers, store will be closing in 5 minutes. Please proceed to checkout." The voice was distorted, slower, and had a strange echo. It wasn't the usual cheerful voice. I ran toward the checkout lanes, banging on the registers. No response. Then the lights went out entirely. Emergency lights clicked on, bathing the store in a harsh red glow. From the darkness, I heard a slow, deliberate tapping, like footsteps. But the floor was empty. I followed the noise cautiously, shining my phone's flashlight ahead. The tapping moved around me, circling, always just out of sight. I felt a breath on my neck. I spun. No one. Then I saw it. The man from earlier, the one in the hoodie, standing in the aisle across from me, face hidden in shadows. I called out to him. He didn't move. Suddenly, dozens of whispering voices surrounded me, impossible to pinpoint, overlapping in a low hum. The temperature dropped rapidly. I shivered uncontrollably. The man stepped closer. When I tried to back away, the floor beneath me gave way and I fell through. Darkness swallowed me. I woke up in a small, windowless room with a single flickering light bulb overhead. The walls were concrete, cold and damp. My head ached. I tried to stand, but my legs were weak. Then the door creaked open. The woman from before stood there, but this time her eyes were wide, glowing faintly red. She smiled, a terrifying, unnatural grin. "Welcome back," she whispered. I screamed, pounding on the door. No one answered. The lights flickered again. The last thing I heard was the mocking clapping that echoed off the walls. I don't know how long I was in that room. Hours? Days? When the door finally opened again, it was the morning. I stumbled out to find the store bustling with customers and employees, everything perfectly normal. I rushed to the manager, told him what happened. He looked confused. "I haven't seen anyone like you here tonight," he said. The security cameras had no footage of me after I entered the store. It was as if I had vanished. I left the store and never returned. But sometimes late at night, when the store is empty and the lights flicker just right, I hear the faint tapping of footsteps, the soft whisper of voices, and I wonder if I'm still trapped somewhere inside. Story the end. It started like any other Wednesday night at the local grocery store where I worked. I was scheduled to close the store, which meant I was responsible for everything from restocking to locking up at midnight. Parkside Grocers wasn't much, just a small, family-run place on the edge of town in Ohio. Nothing fancy, nothing too busy at night, mostly just a handful of regulars and the occasional late-shift worker stopping in for a quick snack or drink. I was about 3 months into the job, and the routine had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Stock shelves, sweep floors, keep an eye on the security cameras, deal with any customers that wandered in, and then close up. On this particular night, the weather was overcast and humid, the kind of night that felt heavy in the air. My shift started at 7 p.m. The first few hours were uneventful. Customers came and went, most just grabbing beer or microwave dinners. The fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead, and the store had that unmistakable chill from the refrigerators humming along. Around 10 p.m., the crowd thinned out considerably, and I found myself wandering the aisles restocking canned goods. About 10 minutes past 10, I was arranging soup cans on aisle 6 when I noticed movement near the frozen food section at the back of the store. I figured it was just a customer or maybe one of the night stalkers who sometimes helped out on weekends. But when I glanced toward the freezers, no one was there. The aisle was empty, except for the rows of frozen pizzas and ice cream. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I shook it off and continued stocking, but a nagging feeling lingered. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps, soft but deliberate, coming from the dairy aisle. I turned quickly, but again, no one was there. I started to feel uneasy. I walked toward the store's center, trying to catch the source of the footsteps. The store was otherwise silent, save for the hum of refrigerators and the occasional beep of the checkout scanners. No customers, no coworkers. Just me. Then I heard a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. It came from the aisle behind me. "Help!" I froze. The voice was barely audible, like a breath of air, but unmistakably a woman's voice pleading. I spun around, heart pounding, flashlight in hand from the cleaning supply closet. The aisle was empty. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" No answer. I felt a cold draft sweep past me, though all the doors were closed tight. I rubbed my arms, suddenly aware that the store felt much colder than usual. I decided to check the security monitors. The room was cramped, walls lined with screens displaying each aisle and entrance. I scanned the feeds, nothing unusual, just empty aisles and dark parking lots outside. Then I caught it. On aisle 9, the camera showed a shadow moving across the floor. Not a person, but a shadow that flickered and stretched unnaturally. I frowned and focused on the screen. The shadow shifted again, this time seeming to crawl along the floor, elongating and contracting like a living thing. I blinked hard and rubbed my eyes. "Must be a glitch," I muttered. I shut the monitor off and turned to head back to the sales floor when suddenly the intercom buzzed, crackling to life with static, then a soft childlike giggle echoed through the store. My blood ran cold. "Carl?" I whispered to the empty room. Carl was the store manager and usually checked in occasionally on late shifts. No answer. The laughter repeated, this time coming from the frozen food aisle. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly walked toward the source. The beam caught the edge of a small toy, an old-fashioned doll with cracked porcelain skin sitting on the floor in front of the freezer. I picked it up, heart hammering, and looked around. No one else was in sight. The doll's eyes seemed to glint in the flashlight's beam, almost as if it was watching me. I shoved it behind the counter and moved on, trying to rationalize everything. Stress, exhaustion, maybe too many horror movies. As the clock neared midnight, I began closing procedures, counting cash, shutting down registers, locking doors. But then I heard it again, footsteps running, fast and heavy, echoing in the empty aisles. I spun around, but no one was there. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered violently, and the temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath. My phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number, "Don't leave." I dropped the phone, hands shaking. I grabbed the keys and dashed toward the exit, fumbling with the lock as the lights sputtered and died, plunging the store into darkness. A voice whispered from the shadows behind me, barely audible but chilling, "Stay." I slammed the door shut, locked it, and ran to my car. As I drove away, the radio buzzed, and through the static came the faint sound of that child's laughter once more. I never returned to Parkside Market after that night. Story, the end. The grocery store had always been an unremarkable place to me. I worked there for a few years during college, and though it wasn't glamorous, it paid the bills and offered a predictable routine. I never imagined anything strange could happen inside those fluorescent-lit aisles, but one night changed that. It was a Thursday evening in early November, just a few weeks before Thanksgiving, and I was finishing up my shift at Harbor Pines Market, just a local grocery store in a small Pennsylvania town. The sky outside was slate gray, rain drizzling softly against the windows, and a chill had settled in the air. I had worked late shifts before, but tonight was different. The air in the store felt thick, almost suffocating. The day started like any other. I clocked in around 4 p.m., greeted my coworkers, and took my place at Register 3. For the first few hours, customers drifted in and out, mostly elderly couples picking up essentials, a few teenagers grabbing snacks, a mom loading up the cart for dinner. Nothing unusual. Around 8 p.m., the crowd thinned, and I began the routine of tidying the checkout area. That's when I noticed the flicker in the overhead lights. It wasn't just a brief blink. It was a pattern, like a slow strobe that pulsed rhythmically. The humming buzzed louder, almost drowning out the soft murmur of the rain outside. I glanced down the aisles. No one else was near Register 3. The store felt strangely empty, as if time had slowed. Then, through the surveillance monitor perched behind the counter, I caught sight of someone in aisle 6, a tall figure standing still. He wore a heavy black jacket zipped all the way up, though the store was warm. His head was tilted slightly to one side, and he stared blankly at the shelves stocked with canned beans and soups. I called out, "Hey, can I help you find something?" No response. I tried again, but the figure remained motionless. Unease crept in. "Sir?" I asked, stepping closer to the aisle. Still nothing. When I peered around the corner, the aisle was empty. The man had vanished. My heart pounded. I chalked it up to exhaustion or imagination and returned to the register. At 9:15 p.m., a woman entered the store, a middle-aged lady with a large tote bag and a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. She walked briskly, casting glances over her shoulder as if she felt watched. She moved quickly toward the back of the store, disappearing behind the refrigerated section. About 10 minutes later, I noticed the same woman reemerge, her face pale and eyes wide. She clutched the tote bag tightly, looking around nervously. "Is everything okay?" I asked as she approached the register. She hesitated, then whispered, "I think someone's been following me." "Do you want me to call the police?" I offered. "No, not yet," she said, glancing at the aisles again. Her nervous energy unsettled me. Then the lights flickered again, more violently this time, casting the store into near darkness before humming back to life. Suddenly, the store's PA system crackled, and a voice, a low, distorted whisper, echoed faintly, repeating the phrase, "Help me." I froze. The voice was barely audible but unmistakably human. I called out, but no one answered. The register phone rang, shrill and piercing. I grabbed it with shaking hands. "Hello?" I said. Silence. Then the whisper returned, closer this time. "Help me." I dropped the phone and it smashed on the floor. The woman gasped and ran toward the exit. I tried to stop her, but the automatic doors slid shut with a hiss. "Let me out," she yelled, pounding on the glass. Suddenly, the lights went out. Emergency red lights blinked on, casting eerie shadows across the aisles. I grabbed my flashlight from beneath the counter and flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the rows of shelves. Near the frozen food section, I saw the man again, the tall figure, now crouched, his coat soaked with something dark and sticky. His eyes were black voids. He raised his head slowly, and the whispering voice became a guttural growl. I stumbled backward, heart racing. The woman screamed, her face contorted with terror. "Run!" I shouted. We sprinted through the aisles toward the employee break room. The door was locked. I fumbled with the keys, hands trembling. Behind us, footsteps pounded. We heard the scraping sound again, the nails dragging on tile. Finally, the door clicked open. We slipped inside and locked it behind us. The room was small and dimly lit. The woman sobbed quietly. I leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. Suddenly, the door rattled violently. The figure outside whispered, "Help me." Then silence. Minutes passed. We stayed locked inside until the manager and another employee arrived to open the store the next morning. They found no evidence of anyone else in the store. No dark stains, no broken locks, just the shattered phone and 2 frightened employees. I never worked a late shift again. Sometimes when I drive past Harbor Pines Market at night, I swear I see that tall figure standing behind the frosted windows, watching. Story the end. I started working at Price Haven in late October of 2019, right before Halloween. It was one of those old, local chain stores tucked between a closed-down Payless shoe source and a payday loan shop. The fluorescent lights hummed constantly, and the tiled floors were always just a little too slippery from either wax buildup or someone spilling something that nobody ever fully cleaned. I was 22, a community college dropout still living with my mom, and I needed the money. A guy named Kurt hired me after a 10-minute interview in the back room over the sound of a malfunctioning mini fridge that never stopped buzzing. Kurt was the assistant manager, and he did most of the hiring and firing because the actual store manager, a leathery guy named Marty, spent most of his shift either chain smoking behind the building or arguing with vendors over the phone. Kurt looked like the kind of guy who'd been working in grocery stores since the 80s. Big mustache, crew cut, and thick glasses. He was friendly enough, but jittery. Always checking the cameras, always pacing. "You'll be on night shifts mostly," Kurt had said, tossing a red polo shirt and a name tag across the metal table. "It's not bad. We close at 11. Clean up, restock, prep for the morning. Pretty chill. Just don't fall asleep on the job or mess around." I started that same week. Night shifts were quiet. Dead, really. Most of the customers trickled out by 9 p.m., and after 10, we might get 1 or 2 stragglers, usually people who forgot diapers or beer. The late shift was just me, this older lady named Dolores who worked the registers, and a younger guy named Ricky who handled produce and stocking. Sometimes Kurt would stick around until close, especially if there had been shoplifting earlier in the week, which happened more than you'd think. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. The usual weirdos, an old guy who asked where we kept the powdered milk. We didn't. A lady who tried to return expired yogurt with the foil already peeled back. A teenager who spent 15 minutes stuffing candy bars into his cargo shorts while pretending to shoplift as a joke for TikTok. The real weirdness started around the second Friday night I worked there. It was around 10:45 p.m. I was cleaning the freezer doors near the back, wiping off the smudges from what had clearly been a child's sticky fingers, when I saw someone walk past the end of the aisle. I remember it clearly because we just locked the doors 15 minutes earlier, and Dolores had said we were done for the night. No one else should have been inside. I leaned out and looked down the aisle. No one. "Ricky?" I called. No answer. I walked down the aisle slowly, glancing left and right. The store was dead silent, except for the low hum of the ceiling fans and that awful overhead music they played after hours. Some instrumental smooth jazz loop that repeated every 45 minutes. I turned the corner and nearly bumped into Dolores, who was dragging a mop bucket toward the break room. "Did you see someone just now?" I asked. She frowned at me like I'd asked if we sold live chickens. "Nope," she said. "Why?" I thought I saw someone walk by. Looked like, I don't know, a man in a hoodie. She blinked at me, then glanced toward the end of the aisle. Well, we locked up. Probably just Ricky. Don't go scaring yourself. This place is spooky enough when it's empty. I nodded, but didn't feel entirely convinced. That night, when we were shutting everything down, I noticed something weird in aisle 8, the cleaning supplies. A pack of sponges had been torn open and scattered across the floor. Nobody mentioned it, and Dolores was already outside lighting a cigarette, so I cleaned it up and clocked out. The next week, I started to dread going in. It wasn't just the late hours, it was the building. It had this oppressive silence when empty, like something was listening. The lights always flickered near the meat department, and there was this smell, this faint, sour, wet dog kind of smell that lingered near the back hallway, no matter how many times someone mopped it. On Wednesday, I came in early to help unload the delivery truck. As I was walking past the dairy section, I saw a man standing in front of the milk fridge with his back to me. He was wearing a dark hoodie, his hood up, and his head slightly tilted down. It was weird because the store wasn't open yet. No customers were supposed to be inside. "Sir?" I said. He didn't move. I stepped closer. "Hey, we're not open yet." He turned his head slowly, but instead of a face, there was nothing, just a dark void under the hood. I blinked. Gone. No one was there, just a display of 2% gallon jugs, perfectly lined up. My hands were shaking. I didn't tell anyone. What was I going to say? I saw a faceless guy by the milk. They'd think I was on something. But it got worse. That Friday, Kurt asked me to stay late to help reset the holiday display up front. We were supposed to swap out the Halloween stuff for early Thanksgiving promos. I was kneeling on the floor, trying to untangle a string of fake autumn leaves, when I heard something crash in the cereal aisle. It wasn't a small crash. It sounded like someone had pulled an entire shelf down. I ran toward the sound, expecting to find Ricky dropping a box or something, but the aisle was empty. Not a single box out of place. Then I heard it again, this time from the frozen foods section. I sprinted over, but again, nothing. No broken glass, no mess, just cold silence. That was the first night I noticed the cameras, or more specifically, that they didn't always work. I went to the back to check the security footage, thinking maybe I could catch Ricky screwing around. But when I asked Kurt if I could pull it up, he gave me this weird look. "You won't see anything," he said flatly. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Those cameras freeze up all the time, especially after hours. I've asked Marty to replace the system for months stuff. He says it's not in the budget." I looked at the monitor. The feed was frozen on a frame from 2 hours ago. You could see me in it, mopping. That night I asked Ricky if he'd ever noticed anything weird in the store. He hesitated. "Like what?" "I don't know. Noises. Seeing people that aren't there." He gave me a long look and then nodded slowly. "I used to think it was just me," he said. "But yeah, I've heard footsteps in the back when I was the only one here. Stuff falling in aisles with nothing there. One time, I swear to God, I saw a woman in the bakery section just staring into the oven. Like, just staring. No movement, no blinking. I turned away for a second and she was gone. "Did you ever tell Kurt?" He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Kurt won't talk about it. Marty either. But something's off in this place." The worst night happened 2 days before Thanksgiving. The store was supposed to close at 11 p.m., but we stayed late to set up a special cooler display for turkeys. Dolores had already gone home, and Ricky was stacking sweet potatoes and produce. Around midnight, I went to grab a box cutter from the back storage room. The hallway leading there is narrow, with a big convex mirror hanging at the corner so you can see if anyone's coming around. As I turned the corner, I glanced at the mirror out of habit. That's when I saw it. My reflection was there, but something was standing behind me, a man, hooded, tall, motionless. I spun around, heart in my throat. No one. I looked back at the mirror, just me now, alone. I ran back to the floor, shaken. Ricky looked up from the pallet he was breaking down and froze when he saw my face. "You saw him, didn't you?" I nodded, unable to speak. He just said, "Don't ever follow it. If you see it, leave. Don't go toward it." That night, when we were clocking out, I found a note taped to my locker. It was typed. Just 5 words. "It knows you saw it." I nearly quit that night, but I needed the job. Rent wasn't going to pay itself, and good hours were hard to find. So I stayed, and things didn't stop. They just changed, became more targeted. I'd hear someone whisper my name over the intercom, except no one was near the register. Once I found the letters of my name spelled out with magnetic price numbers on the meat display. One shift, the power went out for 7 seconds. When the lights came back, every cooler door had swung open. Ricky and I were the only ones in the store. The week before Christmas, Dolores quit without notice. She never even came to get her last check. Kurt stopped showing up at night, said he had family stuff. When I asked Marty, he just muttered, "Kurt saw something he shouldn't have," and walked away. One night, I stayed late to clean the floor buffer. I heard a cart rolling across the linoleum, even though we'd locked all the carts outside. When I followed the sound, I found a single shopping cart at the end of aisle 3. Inside was a single item, a black and white photo of the store from what looked like the 1970s. The windows were boarded up in the picture, and the sign on the building said Hawthorne Market, not Price Haven. The worst part? Standing in the doorway of the photo, clear as day, was the man in the hoodie, and he was looking straight at the camera. Story continued in next message. The night I started working at the Corner Mart grocery store, I thought it was just a temporary job, a way to keep some cash flowing while I figured out what I really wanted to do with my life. The store was small, a local chain in a mid-sized town in the Midwest. The kind of place where you knew the cashiers and the regulars, where the aisles were cramped, and the smell was always a weird mix of stale coffee, produce, and cleaning chemicals. I was hired for the overnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., mostly to cover for the regular clerk who was taking some time off. The owner, Mr. Baxter, was a short, wiry man with a permanent scowl and an accent I couldn't place. He told me the night shift was easy. Most nights, hardly anyone came in after midnight, and the only real job was restocking shelves and keeping the place clean. But he also warned me about a few things. Never stay in the back storage room alone, always keep the front door locked once the last customer leaves, and under no circumstances open the freezer door after 2 a.m. I nodded, assuming these were just company policies or old store rules. It wasn't until my first few nights that I began to realize there was something much stranger going on. The first few nights were uneventful. I stocked cans, wiped down the registers, and watched late-night movies on my phone during quiet stretches. Around 1 a.m., sometimes a truck driver would come in for a coffee or a quick snack. Occasionally, a local would stop by for cigarettes. The store was quiet, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the only noise the beep of the scanners, and the occasional creak from the old building settling. But one night, about a week into my shift, I heard the door chime ring. Ding! But when I looked up from restocking the chips aisle, no one was there. The lot was empty, the streetlights flickering outside, casting long shadows. I checked the security cameras. Nothing. No movement near the front door. No one entering or leaving. I thought maybe a gust of wind triggered the sensor, so I went back to work. But then it happened again, a few minutes later. The door chime rang, but no one was there. The feeling in my stomach twisted. I walked slowly to the front doors, glanced out. Nothing. No cars, no people. The parking lot was empty, except for a lone cat darting across the asphalt. I returned to the aisle, but kept glancing nervously at the entrance. Later that same night, around 3 a.m., while refilling milk cartons in the dairy section, I thought I saw a shadow flicker near the freezer aisle. I stopped and stared. The freezer doors were frosted over, their humming compressors keeping everything frozen solid. I shook my head, blaming tiredness. Then I heard a soft knocking. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, coming from inside the walk-in freezer door. I froze. The freezer door was heavy, cold to the touch, and had a warning sign that said, "Authorized personnel only. Do not enter alone." I called Mr. Baxter on his cell. No answer. The knocking stopped. I went to the front counter and tried to calm myself. For the next hour, the store remained quiet, but the sense of being watched lingered. On my way out that morning, I mentioned the knocking to Mr. Baxter. He looked at me, eyes narrowing. "That freezer door hasn't been opened in years," he said softly. "But sometimes it calls." I blinked, unsure if he was joking. He didn't smile. Over the following weeks, the strange incidents escalated. Every night, the door chime would ring with no one entering. Sometimes the lights flickered violently. Shelves would be rearranged, products moved to different spots. One night, I found an old, dusty photo tucked behind the cereal boxes. It was a picture of the store from the 1950s, showing a family standing proudly in front of it. The mother and father smiled, but behind them, in the shadowed doorway, was the faint image of a small boy whose eyes seemed to follow me. I showed the photo to Mr. Baxter. His face paled. "That's the Miller boy," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Disappeared in this store decades ago. Never found." I started to research the history of the store. The Miller boy's disappearance had been a local mystery, covered in old newspaper clippings. He'd vanished one winter night while playing hide and seek with his siblings in the store. Search parties found no trace. That night, I was stalking the back aisles when I heard a whisper. "Help me." I spun around, but no one was there. The voice came again, barely audible. I followed the sound toward the freezer door. The knocking started again. I tried to open the door. It wouldn't budge. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered and went out, plunging the store into darkness. The emergency lights cast a dim red glow. I grabbed my phone, flashlight on, and backed away from the freezer. The knocking stopped. Then, a soft, cold breath brushed past my neck. I ran to the front, locked the doors, and waited for Mr. Baxter to arrive. When he got there, he told me more about the Miller boy. "Some things don't leave," he said gravely. "They linger. They want to be found." Over the next month, employees quit or mysteriously disappeared. I stayed as long as I could, but one night I was alone, the chime ringing again and again with no one at the door, the freezer door creaking open slowly as if inviting me in. I quit the next day. The Corner Mart closed a few months later. Now, whenever I drive past that empty storefront, I still hear the faint chime in the wind, and I wonder if the Miller boy is still waiting inside. Story the end. The night shift at Miller's Grocery was supposed to be uneventful. I had worked there for almost 3 years by then, usually closing up the store on weekday nights when business was slow and quiet. It was a small-town grocery in western Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, and the worst that happened was a kid trying to sneak candy past the cashier. At least, that's how it felt until that night in late October. I remember arriving for my shift around 7 p.m. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few cars belonging to the staff and some late shoppers. The autumn air was chilly, and the yellow-orange glow of the street lamps gave everything an eerie feeling I didn't notice at first. I clocked in, nodded at my manager Lisa, who was busy organizing the back office, and settled behind Register 3. The first couple of hours were dull. Just a few customers, mostly older folks picking up bread and milk, a family buying ingredients for dinner. I scanned their groceries, smiled, made small talk. Nothing out of the ordinary. Around 9:30, Lisa asked me to help with stocking in aisle 5. She said the new shipment of canned goods had arrived early and needed to be put away before close. I grabbed a cart loaded with boxes and wheeled it down the aisle, humming softly. The store was quiet, the hum of the refrigerators and soft clinks of the overhead lights the only sounds. As I moved boxes of tomato sauce and beans, I noticed the aisles around me were empty. I thought that was odd for a Saturday night, but it wasn't unheard of. That's when I saw him. Near the end of aisle 7, a man was standing completely still. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, with a pale, almost washed-out complexion. His clothes were odd for the season, a thick wool coat zipped up tightly despite the mild fall evening. He wasn't holding a basket or anything, just standing there, staring straight ahead. I froze for a moment, then tried to catch his eye. He didn't blink. His face was blank, expressionless, almost like a mannequin's. I swallowed hard and looked away, convincing myself he was just lost or waiting for someone. I went back to restocking, trying to focus on the work. Minutes passed, then suddenly the lights flickered. A chill ran down my spine. The man was gone. I scanned the aisle, no sign of him, just empty shelves. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining things. I finished stocking and wheeled the cart back toward the storage room near the back of the store. The door to the break room was slightly ajar. I peeked in, expecting to see Lisa taking a quick break, but it was empty. I stepped inside anyway, thinking maybe she had just stepped out. Then I heard a noise. It was soft, like the scraping of nails against a chalkboard, or maybe the slow dragging of something heavy across the linoleum floor. I turned around, heart pounding. No one there. I blinked and suddenly the lights flickered again. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Lisa. Everything okay? I typed back, just stocking, all good. No reply. I decided to head back to the front to relieve myself at the register. As I walked down aisle 1, I noticed something else. Some items were misplaced. A carton of eggs was shattered on the floor near the dairy, and a couple of canned soups were knocked over in the next aisle. No customers in sight. I checked the security cameras from the monitor near the front counter. The footage showed the empty aisles, no one moving around except me. Then, around 10:05 p.m., I saw the man again. Only this time, he was in the deli section, standing behind the counter where the butcher usually worked. His head was tilted unnaturally to one side. I pressed the intercom button, calling Lisa. No response. I picked up the walkie-talkie clipped to my belt. Lisa, are you there? Static. I walked toward the deli, feeling uneasy. The lights above flickered again and then went out completely. Emergency lights buzzed on, casting a dull red glow. I saw a shadow move across the far wall. The man was there, but he wasn't standing anymore. He was crouched, head down, breathing hard. I took a cautious step forward. He looked up. His eyes were pitch black holes. I froze. He let out a low, guttural sound, a mix between a growl and a scream. I stumbled back. My phone slipped from my hand and shattered on the tile floor. Panic surged through me. I ran toward the front doors. They wouldn't open. I tugged at them desperately. Behind me, I heard footsteps, heavy, dragging, slow. I turned to see the man advancing, his coat soaked with something dark and sticky. I screamed, banging on the glass. The emergency exit near the bakery was locked too. I was trapped. Then, out of nowhere, the sprinklers activated, dousing the store with cold water. The man vanished. The lights flickered back on. Lisa appeared at the end of the aisle, flashlight in hand. Matt, are you okay? I nodded, unable to speak. She helped me out of the store. The police came and searched the building. They found no evidence of anyone else inside. No blood, no damage, no broken locks. Only the shattered phone and the misplaced groceries. Lisa later told me the store had been built on the site of an old factory that closed suddenly in the 1960s after a series of unexplained accidents. Some said the spirits of workers who died there still lingered. I never worked the night shift again. But sometimes, when I pass by Miller's Grocery, I swear I see a figure standing in the window watching me. Story the end. I worked the night shift at a grocery store in a small town in Pennsylvania for nearly 2 years, from 2013 to 2015. The store was called Hometown Market, a local chain that had been around since the 70s. The building itself was old, with some of the original fixtures still in place, creaky floors and fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered in certain aisles. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, but at night it felt completely different, like stepping into a ghost town. When I first started, I thought the job would be easy. It mostly was, at least in terms of the physical work. Overnight shifts ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I was usually the only cashier on duty from 1 a.m. until close. The night crew was small, just me, a stocker named Lisa, and sometimes the manager, Tom, who often stayed late to do paperwork. Lisa was kind, but very private. She never shared much about herself. Tom was a typical middle-aged manager who cared about the store but didn't believe in nonsense. The first strange thing happened during my third week. It was about 3 a.m., and I was restocking shelves in aisle 9, where the canned goods were. I heard a loud bang near the dairy section. It sounded like a milk carton crashing to the floor. I grabbed a broom and walked quickly toward the noise, thinking maybe Lisa had knocked something over. But when I got there, nothing was out of place. No cartons on the floor, no spilled milk, no signs anything had fallen. The fridge doors were all closed. I asked Lisa if she'd been in that aisle. She shook her head and looked away. Must have been something else, she said. But the air felt colder there than the rest of the store, and I got a weird chill. Over the next few nights, I started noticing things moving out of the corner of my eye. Boxes shifting on shelves, shadows crossing the aisles, even though no one was around. The security cameras occasionally showed weird glitches, like a black silhouette standing by the bakery counter that disappeared when you looked closer. I mentioned it to Tom, who just laughed and said the cameras were old and glitchy. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I was alone in the checkout area counting inventory when the overhead speakers crackled on. A faint, garbled voice whispered something I couldn't make out. I froze, my heart pounding. Then the lights flickered violently and the power cut out for about 10 seconds. When the lights came back on, the store was deathly quiet. The next day, Tom said there had been a power surge overnight, but didn't mention the voice. Lisa didn't come in for her shift the next night, and I didn't see her for a few days. When she finally showed up, she looked shaken and refused to talk about what had happened. Then, the incidents escalated. One night, while stocking frozen vegetables near the back, I felt a heavy breath on the back of my neck. But when I spun around, no one was there. The freezer doors slammed shut on their own behind me. I grabbed the handle, trying to open the door, but it was stuck fast. I banged on it for what felt like minutes before it suddenly released, nearly knocking me backward. After that night, Lisa quit without warning. She left a note saying she was sorry and that she couldn't handle working nights anymore. Things got worse after Lisa left. One night, I heard footsteps following me through the aisles. They weren't my own, too heavy and slow. When I stopped to look, there was no one there. But the sound kept pace, stopping when I stopped, starting when I started. I ran to the front of the store, but the doors were locked and wouldn't open. My phone had no signal, and the security cameras were all offline. I called Tom, but no answer. The footsteps continued, accompanied now by whispers, unintelligible, but urgent. Then came the laughter, low, guttural, coming from the produce aisle. Terrified, I barricaded myself in the manager's office. Through the small window in the door, I saw a shadowy figure walk past the glass doors at the front entrance. It paused, staring straight at me with empty eyes, and then vanished. The next morning, Tom told me I was imagining things, stressed from working too many night shifts. But I knew what I saw. After that night, I quit. I never returned, and the store closed a few months later. I heard rumors from locals about strange happenings at the old building, people hearing voices, seeing shadows, and unexplained cold spots. I still get chills thinking about those nights, and sometimes when I'm alone in a quiet room, I swear I hear faint whispers calling my name. Story the end. That night started like any other night working the graveyard shift at Miller's Market, a small grocery store in a sleepy town in rural Ohio. I was 23 then, fresh out of community college, working there part-time to help pay the bills. The job was straightforward, mostly stacking shelves, unloading trucks, and cleaning up after the late-night customers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work. I remember that it was early October, and the air had started to turn crisp. The parking lot was mostly empty when I arrived just after 10 p.m. I clocked in, grabbed a flashlight because the store was so big, the overhead lights didn't reach everywhere, and met up with the other overnight crew. Linda, the manager, who was in her late 30s, sharp and no nonsense, and Pete, an older guy who had worked there for years, mostly stocking the produce aisle. Around midnight, things began to feel off. I was in aisle 7, near the canned goods, arranging soup cans by size and brand, when I heard a faint tapping noise. It sounded like someone tapping on a glass door, a rhythmic, deliberate tapping. I looked around, but the store was silent except for the hum of the refrigerators. The tapping continued, echoing softly through the aisle. I glanced over toward the frozen foods section. The sliding glass doors were all closed, but the tapping seemed to come from there. I walked over to investigate. As I neared the freezers, the tapping stopped suddenly. I leaned in close and noticed that one of the freezer doors, the one at the far end of aisle 7, was slightly ajar. That didn't make sense. Those doors were supposed to be sealed tight. I reached out to close it fully when a sudden cold rush of air hit my face. I shivered and closed the door. The tapping resumed, but now seemed to come from inside the freezer. My skin prickled. "Hello?" I called softly. No answer. I backed away and told Linda what I'd heard. She said maybe it was a rat or a loose piece of ice. She was trying to keep things light, but I noticed her smile didn't reach her eyes. Later that night, Pete told me stories about the store's history. Apparently, a worker had died on the premises about 10 years earlier. He'd been closing up late, slipped in the dairy aisle, and hit his head. They found him the next morning, but he never got to finish his shift. Pete mentioned that since then there had been reports of strange noises, cold spots, and odd things moving on their own. I laughed it off at the time, but something about the way he said it made me uneasy. Around 3 a.m., I was working alone in the bakery section, arranging bread loaves on the shelves. The fluorescent lights flickered repeatedly, and the temperature dropped noticeably. I could see my breath in the air. Suddenly, the bakery's glass display case slammed shut behind me with a loud bang. I jumped and spun around, but no one was there. My heart was racing. I grabbed my walkie-talkie to call Linda, but the device crackled and went dead. I tried to shake off the feeling and kept working, but the store grew colder. I could hear faint whispering, but when I stopped to listen, it faded away. As the night wore on, things escalated. The freezer doors began opening and closing by themselves. The security cameras flickered and sometimes went completely dark for a few seconds. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of shadowy figures moving quickly through the aisles, but when I looked directly at them, they disappeared. On my final night working there, I was closing up the store alone. Linda and Pete had left early. Around 4:30 a.m., I heard footsteps behind me in the empty aisles. I turned, but there was no one there. The footsteps quickened, approaching me rapidly from behind. I ran toward the exit, but the lights went out suddenly, plunging the store into darkness. In the pitch black, I felt a cold breath on my neck and a whisper in my ear saying, "Stay." I bolted out of the store and didn't look back. I never went back to that job. Months later, the store closed for renovations, and rumors spread that it was haunted. I don't know if what I experienced was real or just my imagination running wild in the dead of night, but every time I pass a grocery store after dark, I feel that same chill creeping up my spine. Story the end. It started as a normal job, the kind of gig most people don't think twice about. A night shift stocking shelves at a local grocery store. I needed the money to get by, and Greenway Market was hiring. The store was in a small town in the Midwest, the kind where everyone knows everyone's business, and not much ever happens after dark. At least, that's what I thought when I took the job. The store itself was an old building, standing since the 1960s. It wasn't much, a slightly rundown facade with a flickering neon sign that said Greenway in pale green letters, faded from years of sun and weather. Inside, the aisles were narrow, the ceiling low, and the air always smelled faintly of stale bread and cleaning chemicals. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow. I worked the night shift, which meant from 9 p.m. to midnight or sometimes later. The store closed at 11, that's low, but there was always restocking and cleaning to be done. The night crew was small, usually just me and the older cashier, Marissa, who had worked there for decades and knew every inch of the place. Our manager, a guy named Kurt, preferred to close up and head home early, leaving us alone to finish the nightly tasks. The first week went by without much incident. I stocked shelves, cleaned spills, and helped customers who wandered in late. But even in those early days, I noticed odd things. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps echoing down aisles when no one was around. Other times, lights would flicker or dim unexpectedly. The security cameras often glitched or froze, especially late at night. Kurt said the system was old and never really worked right. One night, about 2 weeks in, things started to get unsettling. I was rearranging cans in aisle 5 when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye near the dairy section. I turned, but no one was there. The automatic doors at the entrance had already locked for the night, and the security guard had left an hour earlier. The store was supposed to be empty except for me and Marissa. I shrugged it off and kept working, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Later that night, while I was cleaning the meat department coolers, I heard a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was the hum of the refrigeration units, but it sounded like a voice. It was too soft to make out any words. I froze, listening, but the sound stopped. Marissa was in the back room, counting inventory. When I told her about the whisper, she nodded, almost as if she expected it. "You're not the first to hear that," she said. "Sometimes this place feels like it's alive after hours." I laughed nervously and told her it was probably just the old pipes or the wind outside. A few nights later, I was finishing up near the bakery section when I saw it, a figure standing at the end of the aisle. It was a man wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up. His face was hidden in shadow, but his posture was rigid. I called out, but he didn't respond or move. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. I checked every aisle and even looked outside through the front windows. No sign of anyone. I asked Marissa if she had seen anyone, but she said she hadn't. The strange sightings kept happening. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the figure in the reflections of freezer glass or on the surveillance monitors, but when I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. Objects would move or fall without explanation. A box of cereal tipping over, a shopping cart slowly rolling down an aisle with no one pushing it. One night, I heard the intercom system crackle to life. It was supposed to be off after closing, but the speakers emitted a low, eerie whisper repeating a single word, "Leave." I froze, unsure if I was dreaming or hearing things. I tried to turn off the intercom, but the panel was dead. Marissa was nowhere to be found, and the store was silent except for the whisper. When the morning shift arrived, I left as fast as I could and didn't return until my next scheduled night. Then, a week before Christmas, things got worse. The store lost power for a few seconds, and when the emergency lights flickered on, every cooler door was open. Nothing was stolen or damaged, but the chill in the air was unbearable. I saw the figure again that night, standing motionless near the frozen seafood section. This time I noticed his face, pale, gaunt, with dark, hollow eyes staring blankly. I ran to the exit, but the doors were locked. My phone had no signal inside the building. I was trapped. I stayed frozen until the power returned, the doors unlocked, and the normal buzz of fluorescent lights came back on. I quit the job the next day. Sometimes, when I drive past Greenway Market, I swear I see that figure standing behind the windows, watching the parking lot. The store is still there, still open, but the feeling I had working those nights never left me. There's something in that place, something old and restless, and I'm glad I got out before it was too late. Story the end. That night, the flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a dull, oppressive glow over the empty aisles of Miller's Market. It was the kind of place that felt ordinary in the daylight. Families pushing carts full of groceries, kids clutching candy bars, the hum of quiet chatter at checkout lanes. But at 2 a.m., the store was a different world. Shadows stretched long and deep between the shelves, and the occasional hum of the refrigeration units was the only sound breaking the silence. I worked the overnight stock shift, just me, the occasional night manager, and a lot of empty space. I was 24 then, working the graveyard shift to make rent while I finished up my last year of community college. The night crew was a small group, mostly college students like me, or folks looking for a quiet, no-frills job. The manager on duty was a woman named Karen, a middle-aged woman with a stern face but a gentle voice. She mostly kept to the office, making sure the overnight sales reports were ready for the morning. I liked her. She was practical and didn't bother with small talk. The store was old, at least 40 years, maybe more. The linoleum floors were scuffed and faded, the air sometimes smelled faintly of spoiled milk and cleaner, and there were spots near the back where the heat never seemed to reach. A lot of the equipment creaked and groaned, and sometimes the lights flickered like they wanted to go out. The kind of place that creaks and sighs when you're the only one there. My first couple of weeks were uneventful. I'd unload shipments from the truck, stock shelves, tidy the store, and try to keep my mind busy so I wouldn't fall asleep. But then about a month into the job, things started to get strange. It began with small things. Sounds that didn't quite fit. One night, just after midnight, I was stocking canned goods in aisle 6 when I heard what sounded like a whisper behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. I told myself it was just the hum of the store or my imagination playing tricks. But the whispers continued, soft, unintelligible murmurs drifting through the empty aisles. Then came the footsteps. At first I thought it was Karen checking on me. The sound of boots on linoleum, slow and steady, echoing through the store. I called out, "Hey, Karen!" No answer. The footsteps stopped. I looked toward the far end of the aisle, toward the produce section, but the area was empty. I checked the security cameras from the office later and saw nothing unusual. Another night, around 3 a.m., I was unloading a pallet of frozen dinners when the overhead lights flickered and dimmed for several seconds. The freezer doors rattled on their own, like opening and closing slowly as if someone unseen was inspecting the contents. The temperature dropped sharply. I could see my breath in the air. I called Karen over the walkie-talkie. "Did you notice the lights flickering?" "Yeah," she said, her voice calm but tired. "Probably the wiring again. We're supposed to get it checked next week." But it felt different, like something was watching me. That same night, I caught a glimpse of something, or someone, in the reflection of a freezer door. A shadowy figure standing just behind me, but when I turned, there was no one there. I started to dread coming into work. One particularly cold night, around 4 a.m., I was closing down aisle 12 when I saw a woman standing by the end cap. She was wearing a long white dress, her hair hanging down past her shoulders, her face pale and expressionless. "Excuse me," I said, approaching her. She didn't move or speak. I blinked. She was gone. I felt like I was losing my mind. I told Karen about it. She looked at me, her face unreadable. "You're not the first one," she said quietly. "There's history here." She told me about a man who had died in the store years ago, a stock clerk who had an accident in the backroom loading dock. They said his spirit never left. I tried not to believe in ghosts, but every night the store seemed to grow colder, the shadows grew longer, and the feeling of being watched never left. The final straw came on a night when I was working alone. Karen was off sick, and Mike, the day manager, had locked up early. Around 3:30 a.m., I was in the back of the store stacking shelves when the lights flickered out completely. The store was plunged into darkness. I grabbed my flashlight and started making my way to the front. As I moved, I heard whispers, clearer now, urgent and pleading. "Help me!" I froze. The flashlight beam caught a figure at the end of the aisle, a man in a tattered uniform, his face bruised and twisted in pain. I dropped the flashlight, and when I picked it back up, he was gone. I ran out of the store and didn't come back. Weeks later, I heard that the store had closed for good. They said it was due to electrical problems, but I think it was something else. Sometimes, late at night, I still dream of the store, the cold air, the flickering lights, the whispering voices, and I wonder how many people saw the same things I did. Story the end. Melissa had worked the late shift at Brookside Grocery for nearly 2 years now, and she knew every corner of the store, every creak in the floorboards, every flicker of the fluorescent lights above the aisles. The store was one of those small-town grocery chains, just large enough to offer everything from fresh produce to canned goods, but not so big that you could get lost wandering the endless corridors of a supermarket. Brookside sat on the outskirts of her Ohio town, a sleepy place where the streets were mostly quiet by 9 p.m., and the only late-night sounds came from the occasional rumble of passing trucks or the hum of distant generators. The store's hours stretched late on Fridays, often until midnight, and Melissa usually finished her shift around 11:30. Tonight was no different. It was nearing 11 p.m. when she clocked out, slipping on her jacket and grabbing a quick bottle of water from the break room vending machine. The parking lot was mostly empty, lit weakly by flickering street lamps. She'd planned to head straight home, but as she passed the employee entrance, she remembered she had forgotten to pick up a loaf of bread and some eggs for her breakfast. She paused for a moment, debating whether to go back inside or just skip it until the weekend. The rain that had been falling earlier that day had mostly stopped, but the air still smelled damp and cold. In the end, she shrugged and decided to make it quick. 5 minutes, she told herself. No big deal. Melissa grabbed an empty cart from the row near the automatic doors and stepped inside. The store was eerily quiet. Most of the overhead lights flickered unevenly, casting long shadows in the aisles. The background music, a playlist of soft pop songs, had cut out somewhere along the line, leaving only the distant hum of refrigeration units and the occasional beep of a scanner somewhere near the checkout lanes. As she pushed the cart down aisle 5 toward the bakery section, Melissa noticed something unusual. The store seemed darker than usual. The lights overhead buzzed faintly, and the fluorescent glow struggled to fully illuminate the rows of goods. She shrugged it off. The store's wiring was old, and occasional flickers were part of the usual late-night ambiance. She turned the corner toward the bakery aisle and spotted the bread shelves half empty. Grabbing a loaf of whole wheat, she heard something behind her. Soft footsteps on the linoleum floor. Melissa stopped and looked back, but the aisle was empty. Her heart skipped a beat. Probably just another employee closing up in the back, she thought. She rolled the cart forward and reached for a carton of eggs. As she did, a sudden tapping noise echoed from the end of the aisle, a slow, deliberate tapping like fingernails drumming on metal. She froze. "Hello?" she called softly, but there was no response. Melissa's breath quickened. She could feel a prickling sensation crawling down her neck. The tapping continued, slow and rhythmic, coming from the far end of the aisle near the dairy section. Gathering courage, she moved forward, eyes darting left and right. When she reached the corner, she peered around, but saw nothing but the usual rows of milk cartons and yogurt cups. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered violently, plunging the aisle into near darkness for a moment before snapping back on. Melissa stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. "Maybe I'm just tired," she whispered to herself. She decided to finish quickly. As she wheeled the cart toward the checkout, she noticed a man standing near the frozen foods aisle. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark coat and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. His eyes were hidden in shadow. Melissa's skin prickled again. The man didn't move or look away, just stared straight ahead, his figure rigid and still. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. No response. She glanced around. The store was nearly empty. She pushed her cart faster toward the checkout lanes. At register 4, the night clerk, a young guy named Jake, looked up and gave her a small smile. "Late night?" he asked. "Yeah," Melissa replied, trying to steady her breathing. "Did you see that guy over near the frozen foods?" Jake's smile faded. "No, I haven't," he said quietly, "but some of the staff say they've seen someone hanging around after hours." Melissa nodded and swiped her card quickly. She packed her bags and headed toward the exit. Outside, the parking lot was deserted except for a few stray shopping carts scattered near the store's rear. As she reached her car, she glanced up and saw the man again, standing by a lamppost a few rows over. He didn't move, didn't speak. Melissa's hands trembled as she unlocked the door, climbed in, and locked it behind her. As she started the engine and pulled away, she glanced back, but the man was gone. The next morning, Melissa couldn't shake the memory of the man's cold, unreadable gaze. At work, she mentioned it to a few colleagues, but no one seemed overly concerned. One joked it was probably just a late-night wanderer or a homeless person looking for shelter. That afternoon, curiosity pushed her to do a little digging online. She typed "Brookside Grocery Creepy" and "Brookside Grocery Missing" into the search bar. A handful of forum threads came up, mostly from local message boards. One thread detailed odd occurrences at the store: flickering lights, strange noises after hours, and reports of a shadowy figure seen in the aisles. Another post mentioned a man who had disappeared from the store's parking lot 2 years earlier, never found despite a police search. Melissa's unease grew. Later that week, she returned to the store after her shift, this time determined to stay alert. She kept her phone's flashlight on as she wandered the aisles, scanning the shadows. The tapping sound returned, soft, methodical, coming from the back storage area. She followed it cautiously, her breath shallow. Suddenly, a heavy metal door slammed shut somewhere behind her. The lights flickered and went out completely, plunging the store into darkness. Melissa fumbled for her phone, but the screen was dead. A whisper, barely audible, seemed to drift through the aisles. "Now." Heart pounding, she turned and ran toward the exit, guided only by the faint emergency lighting that blinked erratically. When she burst outside, the parking lot was empty and silent. She got into her car and locked the doors, breathless. The following days, Melissa noticed subtle changes. Shadowy figures glimpsed in reflections, chilling drafts in warm rooms, her phone buzzing with static and random texts that read only "go" or "leave." At work, coworkers started calling in sick, talking nervously about the store's strange energy. One night, Melissa overheard Jake whispering to the manager about the thing in the back room that wouldn't leave. Rumors swirled that the store was built over something, an old burial ground, or maybe a forgotten asylum. Melissa tried to ignore it, but the fear crept deeper. One night, the store abruptly closed, citing safety concerns with no explanation. She heard later that several employees had quit after experiencing terrifying events. Melissa moved away soon after, but she still dreams about those aisles and the man who never spoke, the one who watched silently from the shadows. She knows some places carry darkness that won't stay buried. Story the end. The night I worked alone at the grocery store still haunts me, and I've tried to forget it ever since. I was 24, working the late shift at a small-town supermarket in Ohio, a job that was mostly uneventful, just routine stocking, cleaning, and watching for shoplifters. The store was one of those places where everyone in town shopped, the kind that felt like a second home, but also carried an undercurrent of something you couldn't quite explain, especially late at night. That evening started like any other. I clocked in at 10 p.m., ready for my 6-hour shift. The manager had called out sick last minute, so I was the only employee inside until closing at 4 a.m. Usually this was fine. Occasional customers, quiet aisles, nothing too demanding. But that night, from the moment I stepped inside, there was a strange, almost oppressive silence. The usual hum of the refrigerators and buzz of the fluorescent lights felt dull, as if the store itself was holding its breath. I spent the first hour organizing shelves in aisle 5, the canned goods. Around midnight, a few customers trickled in, mostly locals grabbing last-minute snacks or milk. I greeted them with my usual smile, but something felt off. Their faces were pale, their eyes darting nervously around, as if they sensed something wrong too. One older man, clutching a plastic basket, gave me a curt nod before disappearing toward the frozen foods aisle. I watched him on the security cameras from the break room. He moved slowly, almost stiffly, as if every step was deliberate. Then suddenly, on the monitor, he stopped mid-aisle and turned to look directly at the camera. For a moment, I felt like he was staring right at me, though I was alone in the room. He didn't move for several seconds, just held his gaze. Then, without explanation, he spun around and hurried toward the exit. But when I checked the front doors on the cameras, they remained firmly locked. No one entered or left after closing time. I felt a chill. I told myself it was probably a trick of the light or a glitch in the camera feed. Still, the atmosphere in the store thickened. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently. A low hum began to fade in and out. The refrigeration units, maybe, or something else. I decided to check aisle 7, where the frozen foods were. As I walked, the floor beneath my boots seemed to thrum softly. The air was cooler here, as expected, but it carried an odd scent. Not quite mildew, but something faintly metallic mixed with cold. I reached the end of the aisle and paused. The overhead speaker crackled softly, then a faint whisper came through the static. I froze, heart pounding. "Help me." The voice was barely audible, like a distant plea carried on the wind. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded small in the cavernous space. Only silence answered. I backed away slowly and turned toward the deli counter where I usually kept my phone and walkie-talkie. But when I reached into my pocket, my phone was dead. No signal, no battery life. The walkie-talkie emitted only static. Unease settled deep in my chest. I told myself I was imagining things, that the night was just getting to me. Then, the store's main lights abruptly cut out, plunging everything into darkness, except for the faint red glow of the emergency exit signs. I pulled out my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the aisles in a narrow cone of light. I hurried toward the circuit breaker in the storage room. When I opened the panel, every breaker was flipped on. No signs of damage or faults. Suddenly, footsteps echoed somewhere nearby, slow, heavy, coming from the back aisle. I froze and strained to listen. They stopped. I waited, holding my breath. Then came a loud crash, the sound of metal cans hitting the floor. I ran toward the noise, flashlight trembling in my hand. At the end of aisle 9, I found a toppled display of canned beans scattered across the floor, but no one was there. The hairs on my neck stood up as the overhead lights flickered back on. I heard a whisper again, this time directly behind me. "Help me." I spun around, but no one stood there. The emergency exit door, normally unlocked for safety, was now firmly bolted shut. Panic rose inside me. I tried calling for help, but the phone lines remained dead. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the frozen food aisle. A shadowy figure standing just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I called out again, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. I stepped closer, but as I did, the figure vanished. I felt a cold breath on my neck and stumbled forward, catching myself on the freezer door. The door creaked open slightly, revealing darkness inside, not the brightly lit freezer I expected. Suddenly, the store's PA system blasted static. Then a voice spoke clearly, "You shouldn't be here." My heart raced. I ran back to the break room and locked the door. For the next hour, I sat huddled, the lights flickering and the whispers growing louder. When morning finally came, the other employees found me shaking and pale. No evidence of anyone else was found. I never returned to that store again. But sometimes late at night, I still hear whispers echoing in my mind. Help me. Story the end. It started with a phone call just after 9:30 p.m., when we were already in the middle of winding down the floor. I worked at a small locally owned grocery store in a mid-sized town in Ohio. My name's Lexi, and I'd been working nights for the past 6 months while I juggled online college courses during the day. The night shift crew was always short, just me as the closing cashier, Carl in produce, and Maria managing the floor and locking up. Sometimes, our store owner's son, Adam, helped with restocking or paperwork in the office, but he rarely came out unless there was an issue. The store closed at 10 p.m., and by 9:30 there were usually only 1 or 2 stragglers shopping in the aisles. That night felt like any other until the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting a customer calling to ask if we were still open or if we had a specific item, but the line was dead silent for a few seconds. "Hello?" I said again, glancing at the clock. Static buzzed faintly on the other end, followed by a low whisper. I thought I heard my name. "Lexi." My heart jumped a little, but I tried to play it off. Maybe someone was playing a prank. I'd gotten weird calls before, people breathing heavily or asking bizarre questions like what kind of meat we carried at night. I was used to creeps. It came with the job. "Who is this?" I said, sharper now, but there was no response. Just another whisper, this time longer, like someone trying to speak through thick wind. "I see you." Click. I froze for a second, with the receiver still pressed to my ear, staring out at the almost empty aisles. The overhead lights flickered a little, something that happened occasionally, especially near the end of the night when the cleaning crew started plugging in their equipment. I hung up and told myself it was just someone messing around, a prank call. Halloween was coming up in a couple of weeks, and maybe someone thought it would be funny to try and spook the night shift. Still, I scanned the store more carefully, eyeing every shopper. There were only 2 customers I could see, an older man in a flannel jacket looking at cereal, and a young woman near the deli picking out prepackaged cheese. They both looked normal, minding their business. The flannel guy even waved politely as he pushed his cart toward the register. Carl walked by carrying an empty crate from the produce aisle and noticed the look on my face. "You all right?" "Yeah. Just weird call. Creepy weird or annoying weird? Bit of both." He nodded. "Well, make sure you let Maria know that line's supposed to be filtered for spam." I did. I told Maria about the call, and she made a note of it to report to Adam. I could tell she didn't want to spook me, but she definitely looked concerned. She checked the call log in the back office and said it came from a block number. Figures. The store closed without further incident, and we locked the doors at 10 p.m. sharp. Carl left right after helping with the last bit of produce trash. Maria was in the office doing nightly reports, and I was counting my drawer at the front. The register screen was the only thing lighting up my part of the store now. That's when I heard the ding. You know the sound when someone walks through the entrance doors? It's a soft chime that triggers when the doors slide open. But the doors were locked. I checked them myself. I looked up, and the automatic doors were open. Just slightly. The kind of gap you get if someone tries to force them. I got up and walked toward the entrance, my nerves prickling now. The parking lot outside was mostly empty except for Maria's car, my car, and the garbage bin out back. No people. No movement. I closed the door manually and double-checked the lock. Then I turned to go back to my register when I heard something else. A cough. It was quiet, but it definitely came from inside the store. Somewhere near aisle 4 or 5, my whole body tensed. I turned and stared into the aisles, but the store was dim now. The overhead's already shutting off in sections. Aisle 4 was dark. Aisle 5 had one flickering light. It cast shadows that seemed to jerk with every blink. "Maria?" I called out, even though I knew it wasn't her. Her office was behind me, not down there. No answer. I hesitated, then grabbed the small flashlight we kept behind the counter for emergencies and started walking toward the aisles. My shoes squeaked softly on the polished floor. Every step made the silence more deafening. I turned into aisle 4, sweeping the beam of the flashlight ahead. Nothing, just shelves of cereal, canned goods, and boxed dinners. Aisle 5 was next. I rounded the corner and froze. Halfway down the aisle, standing perfectly still, was a man in a black hoodie. His back was to me. He was standing in front of the shelf like he was browsing, but he wasn't moving. Not even a little. I felt my stomach tighten. Sir? Sir, the store's closed, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He didn't react. I said, we're closed. How did you get in? Still nothing. That's when I realized his feet weren't facing the shelf. They were turned sideways. His body was twisted in an unnatural way. His torso pointed at the soup cans, but his feet were angled toward me. Sir? I said again, louder. He turned. It wasn't violent or sudden, just a slow, jerking rotation like his neck and shoulders didn't quite connect. His face was partially shadowed by the hoodie, but I saw his eyes. Wide, unblinking. The skin around them was pale and stretched too tight, like wax. And then he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was crooked and too wide, as if he'd practiced it in a mirror but never quite got it right. I backed up. I'm going to have to call the police if you don't leave, I said, my voice shaking now. He took a step forward, not fast, not threatening, just deliberate, measured. I turned and ran. I bolted down the main aisle and nearly tripped on a mop bucket someone left out. I made it to the office and slammed the door shut behind me, locking it. Maria jumped in her seat. What the hell? She said. There's someone in the store. I gasped. He's in a hoodie. He's not right. Something's wrong with him. She immediately picked up the phone and dialed 911. While she spoke to the dispatcher, I kept my ear pressed to the door, listening. But the store was silent again. The cops arrived in under 5 minutes. Maria and I stayed in the office until they cleared the floor. When they let us out, they said they didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry. Nothing on the cameras either. I insisted he was there. I told them exactly what aisle. I even replayed the moment over and over for the officer, describing his face, his posture, his twisted smile. They looked at each other and asked if maybe I was overworked, tired, possibly hallucinating. But Maria backed me up. She said she heard the chime from the front door too. She also said the entrance door had scratches on the inside, like someone had tried to pry them open. I went home that night rattled. I barely slept. I kept seeing his face every time I closed my eyes. The next night, I almost called out, but I needed the money, and Maria promised she'd stay out of the office that night just to be safe. The night started normal, no strange calls, no open doors, until about 10:05 p.m. when the last customer had left and we were locking up. Carl had already gone home and Maria was helping me close the drawer. That's when we both heard it. The ding. We both turned. The doors were still locked, no one outside, but something had triggered the sensor. Maria walked over and looked out, still empty. That night, we stayed together until we left the store. But over the next week, it happened again. Not every night, but randomly. Always after closing. And worse, we started finding things moved. A single can of soup in the middle of the floor in aisle 5, a half-empty water bottle on the produce shelf when we never let customers drink in store. One night, a mop was found leaning against the meat freezer with a trail of water behind it, even though Carl hadn't mopped that section. Then one night, I came in early and found Adam sitting in the office, staring at the security footage. What are you doing here? I asked. He looked pale, shaken. Lexi, you said you saw someone in a hoodie? Yeah. He pointed to the screen. I've been checking the last 2 weeks of footage. Look. He rewound a clip from 3 nights earlier. At 10:12 p.m., the feed from aisle 5 glitched for a split second, and in that single frame, a man-shaped shadow standing near the shelf facing the camera. No face, just the shape. He clicked forward. More glitches, different aisles. Someone's in this store, he said, but I don't know how. We reported it again. The cops came, checked the building from top to bottom. Still no signs of forced entry. No one ever caught on camera for more than a blink. But the activity escalated. Lights began shutting off in random sections. Cold spots were reported in the back freezer even when the thermostat read normal. Employees started quitting. Carl left first. Then our janitor, Terrence, said he saw someone in the bathroom stall after closing and refused to come back. It's been 3 weeks now. I'm still working, though Maria transferred to the daytime shift. I've heard more whispers on the phone. I've seen that figure again. Always in aisle 5, always smiling. Sometimes I think he never left. And sometimes I think he never came in at all. He was already here, waiting. Story the end. Melissa had never been one to make a big deal out of running errands. Grocery shopping was just another task she ticked off her list, usually done quickly and without much thought. But that night at Harlan's Market changed everything. Changed the way she thought about those quiet, fluorescent lit aisles where everyone assumed safety. It was late April, and the air still had the chill of early spring. Melissa worked the late shift at a nearby diner and had stopped by the grocery store just before closing time to pick up a few things for the next day. The store was about a 15-minute drive from her apartment in a small town in Indiana, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, or at least their faces. The parking lot was nearly empty when she pulled in around 10 p.m. She figured it was the perfect time. No crowds, no waiting in line, just a quick stop to grab milk, bread, and some fresh vegetables. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and she stepped inside, greeted by the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of refrigerated produce. The store was nearly deserted. The aisles stretched out in neat rows, lined with brightly colored packages and cans. Melissa grabbed a cart and started her familiar route: dairy, bread, produce, then the frozen foods aisle. She moved methodically, scanning shelves and tossing items into her cart. At some point, she noticed the overhead music had stopped. The usual soft rock playlist that played in the evenings was replaced by a low, unsettling silence. The store lights flickered briefly, but then stabilized. She shrugged it off. Probably some technical glitch. As she moved through the frozen foods section, she noticed a man in the next aisle staring at her. He was tall, thin, wearing a long, dark coat, his eyes obscured by a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't move, just watched her, his gaze following her as she pushed her cart forward. The feeling of being watched made her skin crawl. She quickened her pace and turned into the canned goods aisle, hoping to lose him. When she glanced back, he was gone. No sign of him anywhere. Melissa told herself she was being paranoid. Maybe he was a late shopper too, or an employee finishing his shift. But the feeling lingered. She shook it off again and focused on finding the bread. That's when she heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from the end of the aisle. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like fingernails drumming lightly on a metal surface. She stopped and listened, heart pounding. The sound moved closer, coming from the direction of the dairy aisle. She started walking toward the front of the store, planning to head to checkout. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it started. The store was completely silent, except for the distant hum of the refrigeration units. Melissa reached the checkout lanes, where 2 cashiers were finishing up their work. One of them, a middle-aged woman named Carla, gave Melissa a tired smile. "Closing up soon?" Melissa asked. "Yeah, just a few more minutes," Carla, glancing nervously toward the back of the store. "Power's been flickering all night. We've had some weird glitches with the registers." Melissa nodded. Relieved, she wasn't the only one who noticed something off. She swiped her card and packed her bags, eager to leave. As she pushed her cart out the door, a chill ran down her spine. In the dim parking lot lights, she saw the man again, the same one from inside, standing by the far corner near the dumpsters. His head was tilted slightly as if he was watching her. She quickened her pace to her car, fumbling with her keys. When she reached the door, she glanced back. He had disappeared. Once inside her car, she locked the doors and started the engine. As the lights of the store flickered and finally went out, plunging the parking lot into darkness, Melissa breathed a sigh of relief and drove away. The next day, the experience lingered in Melissa's mind. She mentioned it to her coworkers, but most shrugged it off. "Old grocery stores get weird at night," someone said. Another joked about haunted aisles or restless spirits. But Melissa couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A few days later, she found an article online about Harlan's Market. Something about strange disappearances and odd sightings around the store, mostly at night over the past few years. Nobody made a big deal, just local gossip and rumors. Curious, she dug deeper. According to some forum posts and local news snippets, several employees and customers had reported strange noises, flickering lights, and a feeling of being watched. One former cashier claimed to have seen a shadowy figure lurking near the loading docks late at night. Another shopper disappeared from the store's parking lot in 2018, never found. Melissa's unease deepened. About a week later, after her shift at the diner, she found herself back at Harlan's Market, grabbing some last-minute groceries. This time, the store felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. As she turned down the snack aisle, she noticed something strange. The rows of chips and crackers looked undisturbed, except for one section where a few bags seemed crumpled, as if someone had grabbed at them in a hurry. She stopped and scanned the aisle. No one in sight. A sudden clatter from the produce section made her jump. She looked toward the noise, but saw nothing. Just a small pile of apples rolling gently on the floor. She knelt down to pick them up when she caught movement out of the corner of her eye. A shadow slipped between the shelves at the far end of the store. Melissa stood quickly, heart racing. "Hello?" she called out softly. No answer. She pushed her cart toward the front, eager to leave. At checkout, the young clerk looked pale and distracted. "Everything okay?" Melissa asked. The clerk glanced nervously over her shoulder. "I think someone's been coming in after hours," she said. "We found stuff knocked over, and sometimes it feels like someone's watching us." Melissa nodded, suddenly realizing the problem might be more than just flickering lights or glitches. That night, Melissa couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the moments inside the store, the feeling of being watched, the shadows moving just out of sight, the man in the coat. Around midnight, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number: "You shouldn't come back." Her breath caught. She stared at the screen. No reply. The next day she called the store's manager. A gravelly voice answered, refusing to discuss anything unusual, brushing off the concerns as staff stress and old building issues. But Melissa wasn't convinced. Several nights later, curiosity won over fear. Melissa decided to go back to the store after closing to see if she could catch whatever was causing the disturbances. She arrived just after 11 p.m. and waited by the front doors. When the last employees left, she slipped inside and started walking the aisles alone. The store was eerily silent, the only sound her footsteps on the linoleum floor. She moved slowly, checking corners and shadows. Her phone's flashlight barely penetrated the darkness beyond the aisle lights, which flickered intermittently. In the dairy aisle, she spotted something, an old employee badge lying on the floor. It was faded, but had the name Jared printed on it. Melissa picked it up and felt a sudden chill. She looked around, but saw no one. Suddenly, she heard the tapping again, faint, rhythmic, coming from the back near the storage area. She walked toward the sound, heart pounding. As she rounded the corner, a door slammed shut behind her. The lights flickered violently and then went out completely, plunging her into darkness. Her phone's flashlight flickered too, then died. Melissa stood frozen, straining to listen. From the darkness, a low whisper echoed. "Get out!" Panic surged through her. She ran blindly toward the front doors, hands outstretched. The doors were locked. She yanked at the handle, yelling for help. Then a figure appeared in the faint emergency light, a tall man in a dark coat, face obscured. He raised a hand and the lights flashed back on. Melissa stumbled backward, tripping over a box, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The man stepped closer. She screamed. Suddenly, the store manager burst in from a side door, shouting, "What the hell's going on?" The man disappeared like smoke. The manager helped Melissa up, his face pale. "We need to call the police," he said. The police arrived and searched the store thoroughly, but found no sign of the man. They found the badge, but it was reported missing months ago, associated with an employee who had quit abruptly. Melissa gave a statement describing the events in detail. The manager admitted the store had a history of strange occurrences, but refused to close it down, citing financial losses. In the weeks that followed, Melissa stayed away from Harlan's Market. But sometimes late at night, she would get a text from an unknown number, "Still watching." No matter what she did, the feeling of being watched never left her. She changed her phone number, moved apartments, but the messages continued. One evening, she looked out her window and saw a figure standing across the street, wearing a dark coat and baseball cap. She never returned to that grocery store again. The store eventually shut down after a fire gutted the building under mysterious circumstances. No cause was ever found. Some locals whispered that whatever haunted Harlan's Market had finally been released. Melissa never told anyone everything she experienced, but the memory haunted her. A warning that sometimes the most ordinary places hide the darkest secrets. Story the end. It was a slow Tuesday evening in early November when I started my shift at the local grocery store in a small town in Ohio. I had been working there for nearly 3 years, mostly the night shift, and I knew the place like the back of my hand. The store itself wasn't huge, but it had everything a typical small-town grocery needed: fresh produce, a modest deli, a couple aisles of household goods, a pharmacy counter, and the usual frozen food section. That night, I was working alone in the store from 9 p.m. until close at midnight. Our night manager had called in sick last minute, so I was the only employee inside. The store was eerily quiet as usual. A few customers had trickled in around 8:30 p.m., but by the time I clocked in, the last of them had left. The hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint hum of the refrigeration units were the only sounds in the store. I had just started straightening some canned goods in aisle 3 when I noticed the overhead camera monitors flicker slightly, then return to normal. Probably a brief power surge or some kind of interference, I thought. About 15 minutes into my shift, I heard the unmistakable sound of a shopping cart rolling down one of the aisles. This was strange because the store was supposed to be empty. I paused and listened closely. There was no background music playing, which made the clatter of wheels echo more loudly. I grabbed my walkie-talkie and called the front entrance just to confirm if any customers had come in. The intercom crackled and a sleepy voice answered, "No, I haven't seen anyone come in the last hour." I frowned and decided to investigate. Walking cautiously toward aisle 6, I flicked on my flashlight and moved quietly. I half expected to see some homeless person or a stray animal, but there was nothing there. No cart, no person, nothing but empty shelves and the cold linoleum floor. I checked the security cameras again, no sign of anyone in that aisle or anywhere else in the store. Shrugging it off as my imagination, I returned to the back room to check the inventory list for the next day. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The store always felt a bit creepy late at night, but tonight it felt like the atmosphere had shifted. The air seemed thicker and the lights felt harsher. About an hour into my shift, I was stocking the frozen pizza section when I heard a whisper. It was soft, like a breeze brushing past my ear, but it clearly sounded like someone murmuring a name. "Help me." I froze, turning sharply around, flashlight beam scanning the dim aisle. No one was there. I convinced myself it was a prank or some weird auditory illusion, maybe the air conditioning or the buzzing of the fluorescent lights playing tricks on my brain. I texted my roommate quickly to tell her I was creeped out, but to try to stay calm. 10 minutes later, the store's main lights flickered once, twice, then went out. The emergency backup lights kicked on. Dim, red emergency bulbs that cast long shadows down every aisle. The hum of the refrigeration units stopped suddenly, plunging the store into an almost complete silence except for the occasional beep from the cash registers. I reached for my phone to call the manager, but there was no signal inside the store. I grabbed a flashlight from the stockroom and started walking toward the front entrance to investigate the blackout. As I passed by the produce section, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A figure standing just beyond the edge of the light. "Hello?" I called out. Voice shaky. The figure didn't move or respond. I walked closer, but when I swung the flashlight beam directly toward it, the figure vanished. I spun around, but the aisle was empty. Feeling increasingly unnerved, I decided to head for the emergency exit door to call the electric company or get help. But when I reached the back emergency exit, the door was locked from the outside. I double-checked the lock. It was jammed, no matter how hard I pulled or pushed. The sense of claustrophobia crept in and my breath grew shallow. I tried calling my manager again, but the phone line was dead. The walkie-talkie was also silent. The store suddenly felt like a trap. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. slow, deliberate, coming from the aisle behind me. I froze, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. The footsteps grew louder, and I spun around to see a tall man in a dark hoodie staring straight at me. "Hey," I shouted, backing away. "What are you doing here? The store's closed." He didn't respond, just took a slow step forward, his face obscured by shadow. I turned and ran toward the dairy aisle, heart pounding in my chest. I ducked behind the freezers, trying to catch my breath. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then resumed, closer this time. I crawled behind a stack of empty boxes and held my breath. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered back on. The man was gone. I stayed hidden for several minutes, then slowly made my way to the cashier station. The cash register screen blinked on, showing the time as 10:15 p.m. I locked the front doors and called the police. When they arrived 15 minutes later, they searched the store thoroughly but found no sign of the man. No forced entry, no damage, no footprints. The only thing they found was a single shopping cart that had been pushed into the back of aisle 7, filled with empty boxes. The officers told me it was probably someone trying to scare me or a homeless person who slipped in before closing, but something didn't add up. The fact that the emergency exit door was locked and the phones were dead felt too strange to be a coincidence. The next day, I went through the security footage with the manager. The video showed me stocking the frozen pizzas, but at 10:02 p.m., there was a glitch. A few seconds of static, then the feed cut out completely for exactly 1 minute. When the feed resumed, the camera showed the shopping cart in aisle 7 moving slowly on its own, as if pushed by an invisible force. The manager laughed nervously, chalking it up to a camera malfunction. But I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I asked if I could take a few days off, and he agreed, probably sensing I was rattled. Later that week, I found out from a coworker that another employee who worked the night shift a few months before had left suddenly, claiming the store was haunted after she saw a shadowy figure roaming the aisles after closing. No one had taken her seriously. I couldn't get the experience out of my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those cold, dark eyes under the hood staring back at me. The sense of being watched never left. I kept replaying the night in my mind, trying to understand if I'd imagined the whole thing or if something else was at play. About a week later, I got a call from the store manager saying they were updating the security system and wanted me to come back in to test the new cameras. I hesitated, but agreed. Maybe facing the place again would help me move on. When I arrived that night, the store was quiet as usual, but I noticed something new. In the corner near the deli counter, someone had scrawled a message on the whiteboard with a marker, "Don't trust the night." I wiped it off quickly and told the manager. He said he'd look into it, but nothing came of it. That night, as I finished my shift, I saw the shadow again, standing just outside the store window, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. I locked the doors behind me, speeding to my car, my heart pounding. From then on, I refused to work night shifts alone. I quit the store not long after, moving to a different town to start fresh. But every time I drive past that grocery store on my way home, I swear I see a faint silhouette standing just inside the windows, waiting. Story, the end. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly overhead as I pushed my cart through the automatic sliding doors of the local grocery store. It was just past midnight, and the place was eerily empty, except for a few scattered employees tidying up aisles or stacking shelves. I rarely came this late, but the days had been long and exhausting lately, and I needed to grab a few things for breakfast tomorrow. The cold November wind had chased me indoors quickly after I parked my car just outside, and the quiet hum of the store felt almost comforting. The grocery store was a small chain location, the kind of place you'd expect in a town like mine, with its linoleum floors and utilitarian metal shelves, the smell of canned tomato sauce mingling faintly with stale coffee from the in-store cafe. As I grabbed a basket from the stand near the entrance, I noticed the night manager, a middle-aged man named Carl, standing behind the checkout register with a tired expression, scrolling through his phone. I nodded a quick hello, but he didn't look up. The store was already winding down for the night, with most aisles partially cleared of goods and the freezer section humming louder than usual. I decided to start with the dairy aisle, hoping to find some milk and eggs before the automatic door swung shut behind a quiet customer um, who disappeared somewhere deeper in the store. The store's silence felt unnatural. Usually, even at night, the hum of refrigerators, the occasional beep of barcode scanners, and murmurs from employees made the place feel alive. Tonight, it was dead quiet, almost as if the store was holding its breath. I filled my basket with the few essentials I needed, my footsteps echoing lightly against the tile. At some point, I realized I hadn't heard any footsteps behind me. No carts clattering, nothing. I looked up and down the aisles, but no one was around. It was just me, the flickering lights, and the low hum of the refrigeration units. I reached for a carton of eggs when I heard a faint noise, a soft thud like something falling at the far end of aisle 7. I froze for a moment, listening. The noise repeated, faint but deliberate, something dropping, then silence. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding absurdly loud in the empty store. No answer. I debated whether to check it out or just finish quickly and leave. The chill in the air was creeping under my jacket now, and the creeping feeling in my gut told me I was not alone. But the store was supposed to be empty, except for a skeleton crew. I shrugged and pushed my basket toward the checkout, thinking maybe one of the employees had dropped a box or something. Just as I reached aisle 7, I caught movement from the corner of my eye. A flicker, a shadow darting behind the cereal shelves. "Hey!" I called again, more urgently this time. No reply. The store was completely still once more. I moved cautiously to the end of the aisle and peeked around the corner. There was nothing there. The cereal boxes sat neatly on the shelves, untouched. I laughed nervously to myself. I thought maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe an animal had somehow gotten in. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a text, but it was an unknown number. I hesitated but answered. "Hello?" No response, just static. I ended the call quickly and put the phone back in my pocket, telling myself not to freak out over a prank call. I turned toward the checkout lanes, but as I passed aisle 9, I saw something that made me stop cold. There was a cart in the middle of the aisle, but it wasn't mine. It was empty, but it was pushed awkwardly sideways as if someone had left it in a hurry. I glanced around. The aisles behind it were empty. Something wasn't right. My heartbeat quickened, but I told myself it was probably just a janitor or one of the stocking crew who'd forgotten to put it away. Maybe they were in the back. I started walking again, this time toward the checkout lanes where Carl was stationed. As I approached, I noticed the lights near the front flickered again, the buzzing sound growing louder, almost distorted. "Hey, Carl," I said, but the man was gone. The checkout register was empty. The computer screen was on, glowing softly, but there was no sign of him anywhere. I looked around the registers. Nothing. The entire front of the store was deserted. I pulled out my phone and tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. My stomach dropped. I glanced toward the automatic doors, wondering if maybe he had stepped outside for some air or a break. I walked over and pressed the button to open the doors manually. The doors slid open to reveal the dark parking lot. But the lot was empty, no cars, no lights except the dim street lamps casting long shadows over the asphalt. I stepped outside, feeling the cold bite into my face. Suddenly, I heard the doors slide shut behind me. I spun around, reaching to open them again, but the button was unresponsive. The automatic doors wouldn't open. I banged on the glass, shouting, but there was no one around. I realized my phone had no signal. Panic crept in. I pulled out my keys, trying the car doors. All locked. No one was anywhere near. I took a deep breath and walked back inside. The store was even darker than before. The fluorescent lights had dimmed to a faint glow, flickering like they were about to fail. The aisles felt longer, shadows deeper. I thought I heard whispering, but when I turned, no one was there. I headed toward the back emergency exit, hoping to get out that way. The door was locked, but I found a janitor's key hanging near the storage room. I took it and unlocked the door. The cold air outside was a relief. I stepped through and locked the door behind me. I hurried to my car, unlocked the door, and jumped inside. As I started the engine, my phone buzzed again, that same unknown number. I answered, trembling. This time, a distorted voice whispered my name, followed by a soft, sinister laugh. The call ended abruptly. I sped away from the store. The next morning, I checked the news. Nothing about any missing employees, no reports of strange happenings, but I knew what I had experienced. That night at the grocery store wasn't just a late shopping trip. Something was wrong with that place, something I never wanted to experience again. Story the end. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I pulled into the grocery store parking lot just after 10 p.m. It was a Tuesday night, and the place was mostly empty. Just the usual late-night shoppers, a few employees stocking shelves, and the constant hum of refrigeration units. I wasn't a fan of late-night shopping, but after the chaotic day I had, the quiet aisles felt like a refuge. The store was one of those big national chains, clean and well lit, with polished floors and aisles that stretched long enough to lose yourself in. I pushed my cart inside and grabbed a list from my pocket. Bread, milk, eggs, some canned soup, and a few frozen dinners. Simple stuff. Nothing special. As I started down the first aisle, I noticed how silent the store had become. I mean, it was late, but normally you'd hear some background chatter, the soft beeping of the checkout scanners, footsteps of customers or employees, even the occasional paging announcement. But tonight, it was unnervingly quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you notice every little sound, like your own breathing. I shrugged it off and kept going. The bread aisle was empty, just how I liked it. I grabbed a loaf of whole wheat and moved on to dairy. That's when I first caught it, a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, near the refrigerated section. I glanced over, expecting to see an employee or another shopper, but there was no one. Just rows of milk cartons and yogurt cups staring back at me. I told myself it was just my imagination, probably the reflection of a light or something. But the feeling stuck with me, that prickly sensation on the back of my neck. I turned to push my cart forward, but suddenly, the overhead lights in that section flickered, dimming briefly before snapping back on. I froze for a moment, heart racing, but no one else seemed to notice. I shook my head, deciding not to let it bother me. I needed to finish my shopping and get out of here. As I moved toward the canned goods aisle, the silence seemed to press in tighter. The usual hum of the refrigeration unit sounded distant, almost muffled. It was when I reached for a can of tomato soup that I heard it, a faint whisper, almost indistinguishable, like someone saying my name. Hey. I whipped my head around. The aisle was empty. No carts, no people. I looked down both directions, then behind me toward the frozen foods, but no one. Hello? I called out softly, my voice sounding strange and loud in the quiet space. No answer. I tried to tell myself it was just the store's acoustics playing tricks on me. Maybe someone talking on a phone in the back room or an employee near the loading docks. I grabbed the soup and moved on. The next aisle was for frozen meals, and as I slid open the glass door to grab a lasagna, the lights flickered again, more aggressively this time. It was almost like the store was trying to tell me something, but what? I felt a shiver run down my spine. The temperature in that aisle suddenly felt colder, too cold for a grocery store in August, even late at night. My breath caught in my throat as I noticed something else, the reflection in the glass freezer doors. At first I saw just myself and my cart. Then a shadow, a dark figure standing behind me, just out of the corner of my eye. I spun around, but again, no one was there. The aisle was completely deserted. I blinked hard, trying to convince myself it was just fatigue. After a long day of work, I was probably imagining things. But the unease didn't fade. I pushed the cart forward, my footsteps echoing off the linoleum floor. As I rounded the corner into the snack aisle, I spotted the store manager, an older man named Gary who always wore a blue vest and a tired smile. He was chatting with a stock clerk, but when our eyes met, Gary's expression changed. His smile disappeared, replaced by something unreadable. He nodded to me once and then abruptly turned away. I found that strange. Gary was usually more friendly, even late at night, but I didn't think too much of it and kept going. The checkout lanes were down the next aisle. I was almost done. Just a few things left, some paper towels and coffee. That's when I heard the paging system come on. Attention all customers. The store will be closing in 10 minutes. Please bring your items to the front registers. Thank you for shopping with us tonight. The voice was calm and professional, but the timing was odd. It was only 10:15 p.m., and I knew the store usually closed at midnight. Why announce closing so early? I glanced around. There were maybe 5 customers left and only a couple of employees scattered throughout. But the store felt less like a place of business and more like a cage. I pushed my cart faster, my eyes flicking toward every shadow. The overhead lights flickered once more, and the temperature seemed to drop even further. My breath was visible now, puffing out in small clouds. I reached the paper towel aisle and grabbed a pack, then headed toward the coffee. That's when I noticed movement again, this time at the far end of the aisle near the deli counter. A figure was standing just out of sight behind a pillar. A man, tall, wearing dark clothes, his face obscured by shadows. I stopped, heart pounding. He didn't move, just stood there staring in my direction. I wanted to call out, ask if he needed help, but my throat felt dry and tight. The air was thick, and I could barely hear my own breathing. I backed away slowly, cart bumping against the shelves, and turned toward the exit. Then the lights went out. Everything plunged into darkness. The hum of the refrigeration unit stopped, and the emergency backup lights flickered on, casting long, eerie shadows across the store. I froze. A soft, slow clapping echoed through the aisles. It was faint but unmistakable, deliberate, slow and mocking. I looked around wildly, trying to locate the source, but all I could see were flickering emergency lights and rows of empty shelves. The shadowy figure near the deli counter was gone. The store felt alive now, watching me. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and switched on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. I saw the layout in front of me. The checkout counters just ahead, the doors leading out visible but too far away. I started moving toward the registers, heart hammering, every footstep loud in the silence. Then I heard it again. Footsteps behind me. Slow, measured, heavy. I spun around with the flashlight raised, but there was nothing. Just the empty aisles and the dim red glow of the exit signs. I broke into a run, pushing my cart ahead of me, and burst into the checkout area. The registers were deserted. The conveyor belts still stood silent and cold. I pulled on the door handle. Locked. My breath caught. I tried the other doors. All locked. The store was sealed shut. Then the paging system crackled back to life. This is a reminder. Store closing in 5 minutes. Please proceed to checkout. The voice was distorted now, slower, deeper, like it was being played back through a warped speaker. I slammed my fists on the glass door, yelling for help. No answer. My phone had no signal. I turned to see the tall figure reappear at the end of the aisle, closer this time. His face was visible now, pale, gaunt, eyes black and empty like tunnels. He smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. I stumbled backward, heart racing as the lights flickered on and off, disorienting me. I backed into the frozen foods aisle, slipping on the cold tile. The figure approached slowly, never breaking eye contact. I grabbed a frozen pizza box from the shelf and hurled it at him. It passed right through, like smoke. He reached out, and suddenly I was surrounded by cold, a numbing chill that seemed to seep into my bones. My vision blurred. The last thing I heard was the slow clapping again, echoing all around me, closing in, drowning out the world. Then silence. The next morning, the store manager found the doors unlocked and the lights back on. No one was inside. Not a single customer, not a single employee, except me. The security footage showed me entering at 10 p.m., pushing a cart, but after that, the cameras went dark. Gary later told the police he'd never seen me leave. No record of me checking out. I was gone. And the store still sits there, open 24 hours, but at night, some say if you walk the aisles late enough, you'll hear a soft clapping echoing through the empty space, as if someone or something is still trapped inside. Story the end. The night shift at Maplewood Market wasn't supposed to be anything special. I had worked there for about 6 months, mostly closing shifts, and had never seen anything out of the ordinary. The store was in a quiet suburb in Ohio, nothing fancy, a small-town grocery store that stayed open till midnight to serve the late-night crowd. The usual mix of truck drivers, night owls, and the occasional college kid stopping in for snacks or last-minute groceries. On most nights, the work was monotonous but peaceful. Stocking shelves, cleaning spills, ringing up customers, and locking the doors once the clock struck 12. But that night was different. It started like any other Friday. I clocked in at 7 p.m., exchanged a quick greeting with Carl, the manager, who reminded me to check the freezer doors thoroughly because the seals had been acting up lately. Carl was a middle-aged guy with a bushy mustache and a habit of talking too much about his 3 golden retrievers. He was friendly, but insisted on the store being spotless, which was fine by me. I liked a clean workspace. The first few hours went by without a hitch. A few customers trickled in, mostly picking up beer or microwave dinners. Around 9 p.m., the store quieted down. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the cold air from the freezers kept the aisles chilly. I was in the produce section, straightening the apples, when I noticed a woman standing at the end of aisle 5. She was staring at the cereal boxes, but didn't seem to be picking anything up. I caught her glance briefly when she realized I was looking at her. Her eyes were strange, not angry or upset, just hollow. She gave a faint nod and then walked away, disappearing behind the snack aisle. I shrugged it off. People look weird sometimes, especially late at night. By 10:30, the store was nearly empty. A few shelves needed restocking, so I grabbed a box of canned beans and headed toward aisle 7. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from the back of the store, the staff area where the offices and storage rooms were. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, like someone knocking on the break room door. I stopped, listened closely, but the store was silent again. "Hello?" I called out, expecting maybe one of the night stalkers had arrived early or Carl had forgotten something. No answer. I walked cautiously toward the staff door and peeked through the window. Nothing. The break room was empty, the small table neatly arranged with chairs pushed in, the coffee pot cold. Shrugging again, I chalked it up to the wind rattling some of the crates, or maybe an animal outside bumping into the back door. I went back to restocking. Around 11 p.m., I was near the dairy section when I saw her again, the woman from earlier. She was standing near the milk coolers, staring straight ahead, not moving. My skin prickled. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, stepping toward her. She didn't respond. I looked closer and noticed something odd. Her eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, just pitch-black eyes staring blankly. I blinked, thinking maybe it was a trick of the light or a reflection, but they remained black. Suddenly, she turned on her heel and walked quickly down the aisle. I tried to call out to her again, but she was gone, vanished like a ghost. I shook my head hard. Maybe I was just tired. Night shifts were tough, and the weird atmosphere sometimes got to me. I finished up with the restocking and headed back toward the register to check the store's cameras before closing. The security room was small but cozy, with monitors showing the aisles and entrances. I scanned through the feeds, looking for any unusual activity. The store looked empty, but then my heart skipped a beat. On camera 3, the one covering aisle 5, I saw the woman standing there, just like I'd seen her twice before. But then she moved slowly toward the camera, and her eyes were normal. A kind-looking older woman in a worn coat. The feed flickered, and suddenly the woman's face turned completely black, like a shadow swallowing her features. I jerked back from the monitor, feeling a cold sweat. The intercom crackled to life, and Carl's voice came over. "Hey, Mike, everything good over there?" Yeah, all good," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "All right, just checking. You'll be locking up at midnight, right?" "Yeah." I looked back at the monitor. The woman was gone. The last hour was torture. I kept hearing footsteps behind me, but every time I turned, the aisle was empty. Lights flickered sporadically, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Despite the heat running full blast in the store, I found myself glancing toward the back storage area more than once. At 11:58, I grabbed the keys from the counter to lock the front doors. Just as I turned the lock, the store's overhead speaker buzzed, and a child's laughter echoed through the aisles. But the store was closed to customers at that point, and no one else was inside. The laughter was high-pitched and chilling, like a little girl playing hide-and-seek. I froze, my hand gripping the key tightly. The laughter continued, growing closer, echoing from aisle 3. I crept toward that aisle, flashlight in hand from the cleaning supplies closet. The beam landed on nothing but empty shelves. Then, in the far end, a doll fell from the top shelf with a loud crash. I jumped back, heart pounding. The doll was old, with cracked porcelain skin and a faded dress. I picked it up carefully. Written on the back of its neck was Emily. I didn't want to believe what I was feeling, a mix of fear and an undeniable sense that something was wrong in this store. I called Carl again. "Hey, you still there?" Yeah, Mike, what's up? Listen, there's. I don't know how to explain it. Something's off here. The lights keep flickering. I'm hearing things. Maybe you're just tired. You've been working hard lately. Maybe. I locked the doors fully, flipped off the sign, and started shutting down the registers. As I counted the cash, I noticed the doll sitting next to the register, despite me not placing it there. I picked it up and threw it behind the counter, hoping to forget about it. Finally, at midnight, I prepared to leave. The store was dark and silent again. I grabbed my coat and headed for the back exit, deciding to take the shortcut through the employee hallway. Halfway through the hallway, I heard the tapping again, soft and deliberate on the metal door to the loading dock. I opened it, expecting to find a raccoon or something. The dock was empty, but on the concrete floor, there was a circle drawn in what looked like dirt or maybe something darker. Inside the circle were several more dolls arranged in a strange pattern. My stomach turned. I grabbed my phone and took pictures, then hurried back inside. That's when the store alarm went off, blaring loudly and echoing through the empty aisles. I scrambled for the panel, but the keypad wouldn't respond. The overhead lights flickered violently. Suddenly, the dolls on the floor started to move. One by one, they twisted, their cracked faces turning toward me, their black eyes staring with a terrible hunger. I ran. I burst through the front doors, the cold night air hitting my face. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, parked just across the street. The next day, I called Carl and told him what happened. He laughed it off, said maybe I had a bad dream or saw something weird because I was overtired. But I knew what I saw. A few days later, I went online and searched for the history of the store. I found an old newspaper clipping from decades ago about a young girl named Emily who had disappeared in that neighborhood, last seen near the market. No leads, no trace, just gone. I never worked that night shift again. Sometimes when I drive past Maplewood Market late at night, I swear I see that same woman in the window, watching silently, her eyes black and empty. And sometimes I still hear the soft tapping on the back door, calling me back. Story the end. It was just past midnight when I first realized something was off about the grocery store where I worked. I'd been hired a few weeks earlier to cover the overnight shift at the Maplewood Market, a small family-owned store on the edge of town in Ohio. The kind of place that didn't get many customers after 9 p.m., but stayed open 24 hours, mostly because the owner's stubborn about tradition and the occasional late-night delivery truck. I was 25 at the time, working nights because it fit my schedule better, and because the pay was decent enough to keep me afloat while I figured out what to do with my life. At first, the job was boring. The store had that faint, artificial scent of canned goods, bleach, and refrigerated meat. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in long, unforgiving strips. My main tasks were stocking shelves, cleaning up the occasional spills, and making sure the store stayed locked up tight when it was time to close. Usually, the overnight shift was a lonely one. Customers were rare, mostly just a few truckers or night owls grabbing coffee or snacks. The manager, Mr. Keller, was a gruff man in his late 60s. His face was leathery from years of sun and cold Ohio winters, but his eyes twinkled with a strange kind of sharpness. He'd warned me about a few things on my first day, mainly not to linger near the back freezer alone and to always lock the office door at night, no exceptions. I didn't think much of it at the time. The store itself had been around for over 50 years. The building creaked in certain places and the plumbing was ancient, but the neighborhood depended on it, so the store soldiered on. The first weird thing happened during my second week on the job. It was just past 2 a.m., and the store was dead silent except for the hum of the refrigerators. I was stocking canned vegetables when I heard the front door chime. Ding! I looked up, expecting to see someone come through, but the aisles were empty. I checked the security camera feed on the monitor behind the register, but the entrance was clear. No one. I thought maybe it was the wind messing with the door sensor. Sometimes the old doors weren't perfectly sealed, and a gust could jiggle them enough to set off the chime. I shrugged it off and went back to work. About 10 minutes later, the door chimed again. Same deal. No customer, nothing on the camera. Unease started to settle in. The chime kept going off sporadically through the night, each time with no one actually entering. It felt like the store was teasing me, or worse, that someone invisible was walking in and out. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I told Mr. Keller about it. He didn't seem surprised. "That door's been acting up for years," he said with a tired sigh. "Sensors get sensitive. It's nothing." But his eyes flickered toward the back freezer, and he changed the subject. The freezer was a massive walk-in behind the store, its door thick and white with frost. Employees were told never to go in there alone at night. "Something about the cold affecting your head," Mr. Keller said. One night, curiosity got the better of me. Around 3 a.m., when the store was empty and the chimes had stopped, I decided to grab a bottle of water from the freezer. I told myself it was safe. I'd just be in and out. As I opened the heavy door, a cold blast hit my face. The chill was intense, even with a jacket on. I flicked on the light inside. The freezer was vast, rows of frozen vegetables, meat packages, and a humming refrigeration unit at the back. I walked in a little way, the cold air biting my cheeks. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around and yanked at the handle. It wouldn't budge. Panic hit me as I pounded on the door, shouting for help. The light flickered, casting strange shadows on the icy walls. After what felt like an eternity, I heard footsteps on the other side. "Hey, it's me, Jake! Open up!" The door finally clicked and swung open. Mr. Keller was standing there, frowning. "You're not supposed to go in there alone after dark," he scolded, helping me out. "I just wanted water," I said, teeth chattering. He shook his head. "Don't mess around with that freezer. There's things about it." I didn't press further. Over the next few weeks, the strange door chimes continued. At times, I'd hear muffled whispers near the freezer door, faint voices that sounded like someone talking just out of earshot. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was the old pipes or the hum of the refrigeration. But then I noticed other odd things. Cans would be moved from their spots, labels facing inward. Shelves that I had just stocked would be disorganized again. Lights flickered, sometimes plunging whole aisles into near darkness. The security cameras occasionally glitched, showing static or brief, unexplainable shadows. One night, around 4 a.m., a woman entered the store. She wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. Despite it being summer, her face was hidden in shadow. She moved silently through the aisles, selecting a few items before heading to the register. When she reached me, I noticed her hands were pale and trembling. Her eyes, when I caught a glimpse, seemed distant and hollow. She placed a loaf of bread and a bottle of milk on the counter and whispered, "Can you help me? I'm lost." I blinked. Where are you trying to go?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't know. I just need to get home." I was about to ask if she wanted me to call someone, but then she turned and walked out without paying. I looked up at the front entrance, but the doors hadn't opened. There was no sound, no breeze. The bell on the door didn't chime. I ran after her, but the parking lot was empty. I checked the security footage. She wasn't on any of the cameras. I told Mr. Keller about the woman the next day. He looked worried but said nothing more than, "Sometimes people come here when they shouldn't. Just be careful." A week later, the strangest thing yet happened. It was about 1:30 a.m. when I heard a loud crash from the back storage area. I dropped what I was doing and ran toward the noise. The storage room was a cluttered space behind the freezer, filled with crates and boxes of produce. The heavy metal shelving had toppled over, spilling bags of potatoes and onions across the floor. I checked for signs of a break-in, but there were none. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. Then a soft tapping began, coming from the corner near the freezer door. I shone the light there, but saw nothing but empty boxes. The tapping grew louder, rhythmic. It sounded like fingers drumming on metal. I backed away slowly. Then, right in front of me, the freezer door swung open. A cold, misty breath escaped from inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it. That night, I called my best friend, someone who had grown up in Maplewood and knew its local legends. He told me stories about the land the store was built on, old burial grounds, unmarked graves, and a tragedy involving a family who had once lived there before the store was constructed. Apparently, several members of the family had disappeared mysteriously, and locals whispered that their spirits haunted the area, unable to move on. That explained the door chimes, the whispers, the flickering lights. I began keeping a notebook, logging every strange incident. The knocks on the freezer door, the mysterious woman who appeared and vanished without a trace, the shifting cans, the chilling, cold spots that seemed to follow me through the store. One night, a regular customer, a man named Greg who worked the night shift at a nearby factory, came in visibly shaken. He said he had seen a figure standing outside the store for hours, staring through the windows. When he tried to approach, it vanished. He asked me if the store had bad energy. I didn't know what to say. The next shift after that, I was working alone again. Around 3 a.m., the power flickered and went out. Emergency lights kicked on, casting eerie red glows over the aisles. The overhead music stopped. I grabbed a flashlight and started to check the circuit breaker room. As I passed the frozen food aisle, I saw a shadow move just beyond the glass of the freezer. A figure, tall, dark, faceless. I froze. It didn't move. Then the freezer door slammed open. I heard a voice, barely more than a whisper. "Help me." I ran to the back office and locked the door. My phone had no signal. Minutes passed like hours. Suddenly, the door rattled as if someone was trying to get in. I held my breath. The door stopped shaking. Silence. When the power came back on, I found the freezer door wide open again. That was the last straw. I told Mr. Keller I was quitting. He nodded sadly and said, "Some things don't leave this place. It's better you don't." I left the store that day. Months later, I heard from a friend that the Maplewood Market had closed indefinitely, following several more incidents, employees quitting suddenly, unexplained break-ins, and the strange disappearance of a night stalker. The building now stands empty, windows boarded, with only the flickering neon sign still burning faintly. Sometimes, when I drive by late at night, I swear I hear the door chime echoing faintly on the wind, like the store is still waiting for someone to open its doors again. Story the end.